Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome. I always feel badly calling the meeting to order because everyone's having such good discussion and it feels like I have to break it up to start the meeting. Whether you are here in person or on Zoom or watching the live stream, we're grateful that you have joined us today. And as always, thank you for your interest and support. Let me begin with a few announcements. Today, we are meeting in a bit of a hybrid format. Given that the board initially considered holding this meeting virtually, we are allowing those regents participating remotely to vote as permitted by the bylaws. I am pleased to welcome our newest board member who unfortunately couldn't be with us this morning, Maryland's new Secretary of Commerce, Mike Gill. He will join the board as an ex-official member. As many of you know, Mike Gill previously served on the Board of Regents from 2004 to 2009. He provided tremendous insight on key issues, particularly financial and technology transfer. Regent Gill will serve on the board's Education Policy and Student Life Committee and the Economic Development and Technology Commercialization Committee. A few years ago, we implemented a new program in response to an independent review that we did with AGB. The program is called the Regent Liaison program. And it's a program in which we assigned a regent to a university or a regional center in order to provide regents with an opportunity to learn more about the specific campuses. This initiative has been tremendously insightful. Our regents have participated in accreditation visits, president searches, commencements, campus events, and more. With an expanded board and literally a third of our board being new regents and an eye toward making sure that everyone has an opportunity to serve, we plan to rotate regent assignments every 2 years. So at the June meeting, we will update the liaison assignments for the fall. Finally, I want to acknowledge Black History Month and share a little history about the USM, recognizing the importance of this part of America's history. Across the system, campuses are holding lectures, exhibitions, educational programs, and more. Examples include the Salisbury University NAB Research Center, who has created a new self-guided Black history walking tour that takes participants to 7 locations, highlighting the city's work to both reckon with its history and honor the legacy of its Black culture and community. Bowie State University is hosting a series of lectures with topics such as Black health, misinformation in politics, social justice movements, race and law, do all Black lives matter, violence targeting, and the LBGT community. Towson University is hosting an interactive discussion entitled, "Did You Really Just Say That? Interpreting Microaggressions." And here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, earlier this week, Lawrence Brown, author of The Black Butterfly, The Harmful Politics of Race and Space in America, delivered the keynote address. This sample of activities demonstrates how our campuses are contemporizing Black history so that it is a living history. In addition to exploring this country's history of slavery, civil rights, and accomplished leadership in the Black community, our campuses are addressing great challenges of the day, such as social justice and recognizing new fronts in Black history. Turning to our agenda, we will first hear from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, President Bruce Jarrell. President Jarrell's leadership continues to shape UMB and has established UMB's prominent role in the USM and state as an invaluable resource as we manage through this pandemic. I look forward to his comments. On our education forum this morning is on college rankings, and we'll follow President Gerald. After the forum, we will, of course, hear from our Chancellor, Chancellor Perman. President Gerald, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Regent Gooden. Welcome to UMB. Some of you may recall 1 year ago, almost to this day, we stood up a vaccination center in this very space. With many stations, we gave over 40,000 vaccinations at that 2-month period, including the West Baltimore community participants. It's nice to see this space being used as it was intended. So welcome back to the space.
Point of order, please. Well, is there an opportunity for public comment at this meeting?
There is, and it comes up in about probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so.
I don't think so. If we may, we'd like to make a quick comment and then be on our way.
All right.
We would like to point it out to this body that USM is currently and newly bound by law bargaining good faith with the exclusive representatives. And in fact, at this particular point, they owe ASCII several proposals as responses. In our last bargaining, I have to say that we were incredibly disappointed that the management came across as being extremely unprepared. And after all we've been through in the pandemic, there is still an outstanding demand to bargain health and safety matters that to date remains unanswered. We would like for this body to take their responsibilities in this new collective bargaining scheme seriously, and to stop playing games, and to frankly stop hiding behind their high-paid lawyers, and to negotiate with us directly and have substantive and productive conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say to the way that ASCII has been treated is very true, because things that is going down, we had money for our health pay, and they hold on to it, they don't give it to us, and the pay is underrated, not good enough, not good enough. And we have working employees who are hard every day, and they've been discarded, and they've been treated, very poorly. The USM should come to us and negotiate and to start bringing up some of the things that the employees need, what they need, for their families for each and every day. So we are working and making sure that the system stays afloat and even get better. So we deserve more respect than what we get.
Thank you so much.
3579. Our rights are on the line. 2466. We will negotiate. 3579. Our rights are on the line. 2466. We will negotiate. 3579. Our rights are on the line. 2466. We will negotiate. 3579. Our rights are on the line. 2466. We will negotiate. 3579. Our rights are on the line. When will you negotiate?
Dr. Gerald, back to
Okay,
you.
good morning again. In thinking about what part of UMB I would present to you, I really felt compelled to talk about research. And I think many of you already know about UMB's very strong research programs: COVID, cancer, trauma, xenotransplantation, words that maybe you hadn't even heard 2 years ago, some of these. It runs deep at this institution, and we are a highly focused research university. However, I decided that my message should really not be about just UMB. It ought to be about the importance of research universities in this state and in this nation, and the STEM pipeline that goes with those research universities. So I've asked Professor Claire Fraser, who's the Dean's Endowed Professor in the School of Medicine and Director of the Institute for Genome Sciences, to give her perspective on this topic. Now, as background, Dr. Fraser was directly involved in the first sequencing of the human genome right here in Maryland, and she's also pioneered much of the study of genomics in this country. She's a member of the National Academy of Medicine. This is very similar to the National Academy of Engineering that many of you heard about earlier this week with President Hrabowski. Congratulations. But there's an additional reason why she's qualified to speak before this group. Many of you have heard of the science journal called Science. It's really the most prestigious journal in the world when it comes to scientific discoveries important to us as people. You may know that Science is published by the premier scientific society in the world called the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, which has a mission to advance science, engineering, innovation across the world to all people. As you might also guess, the AAAS is led by very prominent scientists, many Nobel laureates, quite a few White House scientific advisors, and some of you may even remember Professor Donald Langenberg, who was chancellor of this system in the 90s, also led the AAAS. Professor Fraser is in that company. She is currently leading the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She serves as its chair of the board of directors and president back in 2020. Obviously, this position is reserved for only the top scientists in the world, and it's a great complement to her expertise. But it also gives her a unique perch for which this group could benefit. It gives her a view of this nation's research enterprise. It gives her a view of what we're doing in the global research race. And it gives her the opportunity, of course, to influence scientific policies, public policy, and the direction of science in this country. So, Dr. Fraser, I invite you to the podium to speak about research universities and this global research race which we're in. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Gerald, for those very kind introductory remarks, and good morning, everyone. I am so delighted to have the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this morning. And as was sort of hinted at, what I'd like to do is share some of my thoughts on the broad US research ecosystem, STEM education and STEM careers, and all of this against the backdrop of what we've all seen as a very large and dangerous anti-science movement in this country, something that we can no longer deny and we absolutely can't ignore. I've been involved in research for 45 years. And for most of that time, I've thought very deeply about my research. But during the last 3 years, in my term in the presidential line at AAAS, I've had the opportunity to think about STEM in the US in a much more holistic way. And I'm going to let you in on a little bit of breaking news, which maybe I shouldn't even be mentioning. But when it comes to AAAS, as I was quickly checking email before I came to the podium, I received an email from the AAAS CEO, Dr. Sudip Parikh, who was sharing the good news that one of our very own here, President Freeman Hrabowski, has agreed to stand for election as president-elect, the next president-elect of AAAS. And not only is that great for AAAS, but Freeman, I'm the one who put your name in for consideration. So you absolutely have my vote.
Thank you.
I'm going to spare you any PowerPoints today, although I could put lots of them up, and certainly as an academic, that's how I'm typically used to speaking. But I just want to give a little bit of background and just remind you that the US research enterprise as we know it today is still relatively young. It can trace its origins back just over 75 years with the publication of the landmark report entitled Science, the Endless Frontier, that was written by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was during World War II, the director of the US Office of Scientific Research and Development. He was responsible for military R&D during World War II. He was a close advisor to President Roosevelt, and the president asked him if he could put together a vision for a post-war research system in the US. And his report laid out a vision for a radically different relationship between the federal government and the US research enterprise than what had previously been in place. And Dr. Bush knew from his experiences both before and during the war, he was also one-time Dean of Engineering at MIT, that a thriving economy and strong national defense required a steady stream of new scientific ideas and a highly educated workforce. And I'm going to take a quote from that report, which I would say is even more true today than it was in 1945. A nation which depends on others for its new basic science knowledge will be slow in its industrial progress and weak in its competitive position, regardless of its mechanical skill. Very prescient words indeed. And what this Endless Frontier report proposed was that the government greatly increase its support of basic scientific research, mostly in colleges and universities. And the idea was that by entering into this partnership, the government could serve not only its interests in defense and the economy, but also transform society as a whole. And we've seen the fruits of those investments. Between 1953, 2021, federal funding for basic research rose from $265 million to about $165 billion. And even taking inflation into account, that represents a nearly 100-fold increase in the federal investment in the US research enterprise. And I think we would all agree that that money has made a profound difference. And if you go out and ask people what they think the biggest research successes might be from the latter half of the 20th century, many would point to the space program. Probably all of us in this room who were alive in 1969 remember where we were when we saw Neil Armstrong take his first steps on the moon. But I think we have seen just much more recently how the 2-decade or so investment in developing new vaccine platforms allowed us to develop, approve, and deploy vaccines against COVID-19 in just about a year's time. There are many, many successes to point to, and I'm sure we all have our favorite. But the point of all of this is as sort of an introduction to my next remarks is that for much of the time since the end of World War II, the US has been in a very enviable and I would say undisputed position as being the world's leader in science and technology. And this is regard to both science funding and the measurable outputs, whether it be peer-reviewed papers, patents, inventions, new companies, tech transfer. But I think we now have to come to grips with the fact that the world is changing and changing rapidly. A just released 2022 report on the state of US science and engineering from the National Science Board, this is a report that comes out every 2 years, indicates that the scope, quality, and vitality of the science and engineering enterprise in the US continues to be at ever increasing risk. I would encourage all of you to take a look at that report. It's quite lengthy, and I had to really contain my desire to want to share with you all the figures and graphs and statistics. I'm going to spare you that today, but there's some really important information there that is probably worth taking a look at. First topic, let's take a look at STEM trained workers. We all know that the US economy is absolutely dependent on STEM workers with a broad range of educational credentials. Strong K-12 education in math and science is essential for entry into post-STEM majors and ultimately careers. The US does pretty well with regard to its rank in science literacy, and these are data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, but it's not necessarily a terribly enviable position being 7th out of 37 countries. But in mathematics, we're doing even worse. We rank 25th out of 37 countries. And if you look at these averages for students from underrepresented populations, the numbers are even worse. And what we see is that STEM teachers in K-12 with less than 3 years of experience are more often found in schools with high underrepresented minority populations or high rates of poverty. And I certainly know from my own experience, it was a highly qualified, highly enthusiastic science teacher that sparked my interest in a career in science. You know, we might say in a state like Maryland, that's had a strong and consistent track record in scientific innovation, that maybe we're doing okay. But I would argue that we can do a whole lot more to try and catch those students that are still falling through the cracks. We know that some students go directly into STEM careers right from high school, but the majority of the nation's science and education enterprise depends heavily on recipients of higher education degrees. There's been a slight increase in the number of undergraduate STEM degrees awarded over the past 20 years. The number is now somewhere between 25 and 30%. Many groups are underrepresented in this cohort. Not surprisingly, African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans. There are many reasons for this, and we can talk about that at a later time, but certainly the affordability of higher education is a factor, but it's also true that these students don't necessarily realize that they have potential to pursue a STEM career. And when we think about advanced degrees beyond the bachelor's degrees, both master's and PhDs, the numbers get even worse. For decades, the US has led the world in the number of STEM doctoral degrees awarded. However, over the past 20 years, China, and to a lesser extent, South Korea and Japan have closed that gap. China now awards essentially the same number of doctoral degrees as the US. And about 35% of the doctoral students studying in the US are international students. They're here on temporary visas, and many of those return to their home country. So we can't just look at the total number of advanced degrees awarded, because not all of those students stay here. And so I think the very stark conclusion is that the US is facing a potential crisis with regard to the STEM workforce. There's far too little supply for an ever increasing demand. And if we now look at R&D performance and funding, we know that the nation's ability to innovate is driven not only by the development of a qualified workforce to perform technologically advanced activities, but also by its investments in R&D. Global R&D expenditures tripled from $726 billion in 2000 to an estimated $2.4 trillion in 2019. And while the US spent more on R&D than any other country in 2019, its global share declined as several middle-income countries outpaced the US. As we see with the workforce situation, China, and to a lesser extent, other South Asian countries are rapidly gaining on us in terms of expenditures with regard to R&D. Federal funding of R&D in the US has increased over the past 20 years or so, but increased only very slowly. And moreover, the share of federal R&D in the US declined from 31% to 21% in 2019. And this occurred across all research types and sectors. And we know that higher education institutions rely heavily on federal support for R&D. The decline in federal research funding has potential implications for graduate student training because so many students in the STEM fields are supported by federal dollars. And this has the makings, I'm afraid, of a perfect storm. We can also look at productivity measurements, whether it be research publications, patents, et cetera. Again, it's the same story. Globally, 6 countries produce more than 50% of worldwide peer-reviewed publications. China, at 23% of the total, leads the US at 16% of the total. This is also true with patenting. It's also true with venture investments. It goes on, and I think I've shared more than enough statistics with you. I think you get the point. So we have enormous opportunities here, both challenges and opportunities, to really double down, I think, to help continue to preserve the US capacity in science and technology, both by investing in R&D and also by paying attention to the opportunities to enhance education and training so that the STEM workforce in the United States resembles the US population demographics. And that's where we have a long way to go. Some thoughts of my own now outside of this report. I think we've seen that, the commitment to pursue graduate education in STEM requires a tremendous commitment and comes at great personal sacrifice. We saw a lot of these pressures play out during COVID-19, particularly with regard to pressures on women in early stages in their careers. The average age for first NIH grant to those with PhDs in the life sciences is over age 40. And there are some who would argue that in that case, some of a scientist's most productive years are behind him or her. We still have this indentured servant model of graduate training, and that's really tough. So far too many students start down this path, but decide that there are easier things to do in terms of trying to achieve work-life balance. And they either leave academia or leave science altogether for other fields. And again, I think we could do a little bit more to think about being more family friendly. And it has certainly been my experience that the current generation of early career STEM investigators is placing a much higher premium on that than maybe someone of my generation did. And I think one of the other really important messages that I want to, or thoughts that I want to leave with you today, and it really sort of goes beyond specifically STEM workforce development, but I think it's the need, the critical need to expand and broaden the STEM curriculum for every student, beginning in K through 12. Interestingly, a Pew Research Center poll in 2018 revealed that 75% of Americans believe that K through 12 STEM education in the US is below average. So this isn't just statistics, this is actually the sentiment within the US. Certainly when I was in school, there were a lot of courses, various STEM courses for non-majors. I think, well, I get the reason for that. I think it also sends the inadvertent message that hardcore STEM is not for everyone. And I think that this is in part, the lack of education on the importance of science, the importance of evidence-based policy making has really seriously contributed to where we find ourselves today during the pandemic, dealing with strong anti-vaccine and anti-science rhetoric. And unless and until we do a better job of making STEM for all a priority, the politicization of science as a consequence of these disinformation campaigns will continue. And I think this brings me to a final thought. Again, this is my thought, not one that was in this report. And this is certainly something that has become very apparent to me during my work with AAAS. And that is the need for a much more active and meaningful public engagement on the part of our scientists. You know, those of us who are scientists, we're very well positioned to explain what the COVID vaccines are all about, how they work, or how human activity is contributing to climate change around the globe. But our scientific training did not include instructions for meaningful public engagement. We need to figure out how to navigate science communication in a complex web of disinformation. It's coming from multiple sources. And what I think this ultimately gets down to is trust. Certainly when I was growing up, I didn't know anybody in science, but we weren't dealing with all of this information. If you don't know a scientist, if you don't personally know them, if you don't trust them, and these are relationships that take time to develop, then we are kidding ourselves to think that we can go out and recite statistics and data and have a skeptical public assume that, yes, why not believe us? I used to have a coffee mug. I lost it maybe deliberately. It said, trust me, I'm a scientist. But that's really sort of the sentiment behind a lot of what we do. And though we've been trying to use our persuasive science words, it's not enough. We're losing this battle. And I would recommend one other publication to you. This is a book published last year by Dr. Andrew Hoffman from the University of Michigan, entitled The Engaged Scholar. He lays out a vision where going forward, the expectation is that for all of us in academia, meaningful public engagement, that is, we go out and we spend time in communities, not that we give one lecture a year in our, in our sons or daughters' high school classes or do something else, that we go out and build these relationships and build trust. And his premise is based on the fact, and it is absolutely true, that we in science, I don't care what sector you're in, we in science spend most of our time talking to each other. Some of us even talk to ourselves, but most of the time we talk to each other. That's not the kind of communication and engagement that's going to make a difference. And I know that all of you here in this audience want to be able to boast that the University System of Maryland is having a meaningful societal impact from the work that goes on in your four walls. And so I would just leave with you the thought that maybe going forward, we need to reconfigure what it means to be an academic. It may mean changing the reward system for the research enterprise, where activities like this engagement, this public engagement that I'm describing, count as much as peer-reviewed publications and research funding. But I will close my remarks just by saying, I think for too long, we've all taken for granted the US leadership in the research enterprise. It's a very different world today. It's not too late to try and change that and do a course correction. But whatever we do, I think we need to do it with the utmost urgency. Yes. So thank you. Thank you. Or discussion, or I don't know. I just sit down.
No. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Frazier? Yes, Michelle.
Madam Chair, I just want to acknowledge Claire, excellent presentation. I really appreciate the way you laid out the challenge that is before us in growing the number of individuals who are researchers in the STEM fields. Thank you for acknowledging the different backgrounds from which we have to cultivate in order to make sure that our representation in STEM research looks like the demographics of this country. So I think you made a very compelling case, and I just wanted to thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just one comment. I think some may know, but most don't, that Claire really is, Bruce is brilliant to bring it. She is a national and international treasure. Would you give her a round of applause? The other point is that, Madam Chair, is that it reflects what Bruce is saying today, which is that our state has a great opportunity, given where we sit with the national agencies, to invest more and to be a beacon for the rest of the country in this area. And this great example for us, we should all be inspired. Thank you.
Chancellor?
Well, I can't resist. I need to confess to all of you that for the 10 years I was here, I found every reason I could find to sit down with Claire in her office. And I always came away wiser. Yeah. So I am sitting here very proudly.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Frazier, I spent my entire career in the STEM world, and your discussion this morning was informative, but very sobering. And, I don't think we often reflect on this whole supply and demand that you discussed. We know how hard it is to hire people in business and to find the right STEM resources. And I think it's something that we have to take very seriously. And so Michelle hit the nail on the head. If we don't make the demographics match what the field requires, we're going to have problems. And I guess my question is, with the pandemic for the last 2+ years, do you think that has hurt the STEM production even more, because particularly in K through 12, where the students haven't really had real opportunities to interact with other STEM professionals or be able to use the tools as they could, say, before the pandemic. Do you see any lasting impact from that for this next generation?
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments and for your question. I think your question is right on point. And the answer is yes, absolutely. The pandemic has had very broad and I think very profound impacts. I have not seen the kind of data that you are speaking about with regard to K through 12, but clearly not that specifically, but we've seen how students have suffered tremendously being out of the classroom for so long. There have been a couple of studies published at the undergraduate and graduate level with regard to the impact of the pandemic. And far too many students have decided that because they haven't had the ability to interact, they feel like they've lost their lifelines in a career path that is challenging enough under the best circumstances, that they've made the difficult decision to pursue another field. And it's, I don't know that anybody has the appropriate crystal ball to say how long it is going to take us to recover from what has happened. But I do think, just as we're seeing with healthcare workers, we're going to see these effects play out for many years to come.
Thank you. Any other, yes.
Good morning. As a woman in STEM and hopefully future healthcare provider, this was personally very enlightening, but I think I also see exactly the things that Chair Gooden is mentioning in my peers from engineering, chemical. I live with a chemical engineer and an animal science major who's on the pre-vet track. And so kind of my first question is, we have our first USMSC meeting this Sunday of this semester. Do you have any guidance or reflections for future STEM professionals, maybe a beacon of hope or anything? What should we hold on to or look for? Because I think you touched on something that I definitely see in my life, which is like that people are more interested in this work-life balance, especially after having lost. I know I personally lost my clinical opportunities and research opportunities in the last 2 years. So what guidance can you offer for future STEM professionals?
Yeah, well, that's a tough question. And, there are times when I think I'm probably happier that I'm at this end of my career rather than starting out as you are, because it's really tough. All that being said, I look back and despite all of the hardships, I can't think of a more fulfilling career. We all make the decision to go into STEM, I think, one, because of a fundamental interest, but two, I think there's really the desire there to want to leave the world a better place. Those motivations can be hard to find when times get tough. But I think that ultimately, if you're taking a longer term perspective, it's where are you going to find the satisfaction that you derive from your career? And I would argue that the satisfaction from a career in STEM is phenomenal. There's also, just the very, dollars and cents aspect of this, that trained STEM professionals on average are earning a higher wage and are finding it easier to find employment, to change employment than non-STEM, than the non-STEM workforce. Ultimately though, I don't know that people make decisions based on dollars and cents, but for me, it has always been the feeling that I really have made a difference. And, and that's why I think for so many in the sciences, it was so painful to watch the number of COVID deaths climb when we know that, we had a way to address this and we just weren't getting our message through.
Well, Dr. Fraser, thank you for a very enlightening talk this morning.
Thank you.
We're now going to shift to our educational forum, and it's on a familiar topic, college rankings. Months ago, Regent Leggett shared an interesting op-ed on how college rankings might be improved. Without doubt, rankings serve as useful data points for a range of stakeholders. But as with any tool or product, there is always room for improvement. Joining us today is Ben Wadowski, currently a visiting scholar at the University of Virginia and former journalist and editor of the US News and World Report. He has written about higher education for other publications such as The Atlantic, The Wall Street Journal, and The Washington Post. He has been a senior scholar at the Kauffman Foundation, guest scholar at the Brookings Institute, policy professor at SUNY Albany, and director of higher education studies at the Rockefeller Institution of Government. In addition to US News, he has held leadership positions at the College Board and most recently, Strata Education Network. He is here today to help us better understand college rankings, their value, and how they are used, and ways that these ranking systems could be enhanced. And so welcome. And I will turn it over.
Thank you very much, Chair Gooden, for that kind introduction. And thanks to all of you for inviting me to speak to you this morning. I'm sorry that I'm traveling today and I couldn't join you in person. I am a Maryland resident. I have kids who graduated from Maryland public schools and one who is in a UMBC graduate program. I've actually had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Hrabowski for my podcast, and I know just how important our state's university system is. I've been thinking about college rankings and accountability for a long time. First, as you heard, as the editor of the US News and World Report College Guides, then as a book author, writing about the spread of university rankings internationally, and today, as someone who believes that we need the right measures of success in higher education, and that those measures can take different forms for different purposes to provide transparency about what's working and incentives to get better. Now, in my brief comments, I certainly don't plan to debate the distinguished president of Princeton University, whose op-ed article was circulated to the Regents, I understand, by Regent Leggett. My goal is not to persuade you to love college rankings or to hate them. I have the much more limited aim of suggesting that some kind of data and accountability measures are important for higher education, given the huge power of this sector. And in a world of consumer empowerment and a desire for effective public spending, we're much better off embracing the desire for metrics of success and finding better ways to measure and to improve whatever characteristics we decide are most important for students and for society. I'm going to structure my presentation in 3 parts, and then we'll have a little time for questions and discussion. First, I'm going to talk about how did we get here. I'll tell you just a little bit about the history of rankings, their influence, and the different kinds of data that we now have to compare colleges and universities on a whole range of measures. Next, I'm going to review some of the criticisms of the rankings. And then finally, I'm going to try to talk about how we should think about rankings. Are they just an unpleasant fact of life, or can they be a force for improving higher education? So how did we get here? Well, rankings take many different forms, and they have a pretty long history, certainly going back to the 19th century. One of the pre-reads that I circulated to all of you gives you a few examples. One of my favorites is from the University of California, from its yearbook in 1895. And there's a wonderful diagram that shows various measurements of the physical fitness of a very large group of young men at the University of California. And it has these photographs of them doing calisthenics in these wonderful kind of old-fashioned, exercise outfits. And it compares their aggregate statistics with the average for a very large group of East Coast men at various elite colleges. So let's call them the blue bloods. And it shows you this still very relevant concept of value added. It shows you in this chart just how much the fitness of the California men improved over time. So Of course, it's easy to take a tongue-in-cheek view of this kind of comparison, but ultimately, this is really serious stuff because people want information to guide their decisions about education. And of course, universities themselves are not strangers to making decisions about academic quality and merit. And throughout the 20th century, there were various efforts to create comparative measures. So the big development in today's rankings really came in 1983. And that's when US News began its survey of college presidents. In some ways, you know, back in the day, this was just a typical news magazine exercise. They did a survey of presidents, you know, who do you think is best academically? But this quickly became very popular, and you won't be surprised, it became very controversial. Lots and lots of college presidents objected, and the magazine responded. This is long before I was there. The magazine responded not by abandoning rankings, but by adding a lot of data. That was data on everything from funding levels to class size, to admit rates, to SAT scores. And needless to say, that did not stop the controversy. In fact, rankings continued to become extremely popular, and lots of other media organizations joined in with their own versions. Those include Forbes magazine, Money magazine, the Washington Monthly, which really very explicitly positions itself as an alternative to US News, with a focus on how universities contribute to the public good by things like educating low-income students, spending on research, and sending students into public service. One of the articles I circulated to all of you is from the editor of the Washington Monthly, who describes their approach. Now, the way I think about it, in the same way that financial markets need information in order to function, there's a case to be made that a national higher education market requires comparative information. So a student in Delaware who is making a decision about where to enroll can compare schools in California and schools in Michigan on the same measures. And, you know, this concept really became popular after the US News rankings took off. Many other countries came up with their own versions. There were dozens of other countries where there were national level college rankings, every place from Peru to Italy to Kazakhstan, really all over the world. And then big development, almost 20 years ago, two very influential global rankings were created. One was by a Chinese university, Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and that one focuses heavily on research. And another ranking was created by the British publication, Times Higher Education. So in a global higher education market, the idea is a student in Singapore would now be able to compare universities, let's say in Paris or between those in Boston. And the last part of the rankings landscape that I'm going to mention is a little bit less about consumer information, and it's more about public policy, although in some cases, those two uses actually overlap. So as I said, there's a tremendous amount of information. There is a tremendous interest in getting better information on student outcomes and earnings, including debt levels. So in recent years, of course, we've seen the development of the college scorecard by the federal government. And that's one of the instruments that's discussed in a new American Enterprise Institute report that you should also have seen in the pre-reads. In fact, just this week, a new version of the college scorecard was released, and that includes some data on costs and graduation rates and earnings that was restored from a previous version, and also some very useful national comparisons on various measures between colleges. And finally, part of the promise of higher education, of course, is its potential to foster upward mobility. So data on what's happening there has also been spreading and has gotten a lot of attention. Many of you are probably familiar with the work of the Harvard economist, Raj Chetty. And just last month, the think tank Third Way came out with an economic mobility index as yet another way to compare colleges. It's actually by the same analyst who created the college scorecard. And just a couple of days ago, as I was thinking about my remarks for this morning, I learned that the Carnegie Classifications, which are actually joining the American Council on Education, are going to be adding a category next year that tries to show just how well colleges contribute to social and economic mobility while they're serving a diverse group of students. So there's a tremendous amount of ranking and rating information out there. And that goes from those that are aimed at students and families who are making decisions to those that are trying to help policymakers, as well as the general public, evaluate whether higher education is meeting certain broader social goals. Where does this all come from? You know, you could argue that there's a deep-seated human need to compare and to sort. And even if you don't buy that, there's certainly a real need on both the consumer side and on the policy side to look very carefully at educational outcomes, as both individual investment and, of course, public investment has risen over the years. I don't think it's at all a coincidence that the US News rankings emerged following the rise of the consumer empowerment movement of the 1970s. And I think it's fair to say that the educational accountability movement has only intensified since then. Well, it is not going to shock any of you to hear that there are lots and lots of criticisms of consumer rankings. I'll just throw out a number of the common criticisms. Critics certainly often argue that the rankings are excessively focused on inputs, whether that's research spending or the average SAT scores of incoming students. And, you know, even a measure that seems to be an outcome, like graduation rates, can arguably be seen as an indirect input variable. And that's because we know, of course, that there's a close connection between demographics, including family income, and graduation rates. That's also true for academic qualifications of incoming students. So if you know the background of incoming students, that can tell you a lot about likely graduation rates. If Harvard has a 97% graduation rate, because of course we have to pick on Harvard, it's not clear that they should get credit for that as such a big accomplishment, or whether that's just a function of the kinds of students they admit. Let's take another factor, surveys. When rankings take into account surveys of college presidents and provosts, as the US News ranking does, for example, the question that always arises is how well are the people answering the survey really positioned to judge the quality of other institutions? Using surveys is one of the factors that leads critics to use the term beauty contest to describe the rankings. There's also the danger of creating perverse incentives. If a major global ranking prioritizes science research, is that going to incentivize students to put a disproportionate amount of resources into those fields when arguably there might be better, more important needs elsewhere? If a ranking stresses graduate salaries to measure return on investment, is that going to lead students or universities to focus less on some very important but less lucrative fields like teaching or social work? Even rankings of economic mobility can be faulted, as we've seen this week with some discussion about the new Carnegie Classification. There was one higher education commentator who pointed out that just having a lot of low-income students in your region and having the good fortune to be near a major job center, let's say Silicon Valley, where there's fast economic growth, that can make a university look really good on economic mobility. And that might or might not be a reflection of something particularly good that the university is doing educationally. You know, overall, I think it's probably fair to say that the concern is that rankings are just going to reinforce the status hierarchy and reward well-resourced institutions instead of encouraging universities to focus on genuinely becoming more effective. So, what should we make of all this? This is my final section. You know, the first thing I would say is that, of course, there are plenty of legitimate criticisms of rankings. But pointing to some of those problems, as I just have to give you a sense of what's out there, I really don't think that should lead us just to throw up our hands and say, well, we can never measure everything perfectly, so let's not measure anything at all. As a practical matter, rankings aren't going away. We're in an age of accountability, and there's a lot of legitimate concern about identifying places that do a good job for students. That includes return on investment, both for individuals and for policymakers. And I would add that I think that having so many different rankings, they've really proliferated, you know, over the last few decades, each of them with different components, is really something that's very useful because it can help us think about which priorities are most important to us and also where the rankings can be improved. So if your institution has a great track record of upward mobility for first gen and low income students, maybe improved retention and graduation rates, lower levels of debt, a strong record of job placement for graduates, good earnings after 10 years. Maybe you want to focus on rankings that emphasize those factors and highlight your successes there. If you have a ton of faculty members who are very productive researchers, members of the national academies and so forth, that's a different kind of accomplishment that you might also want to emphasize. Different constituencies care about different things. The consumer perspective is not necessarily always the same as the policy perspective. So for a policymaker, a college with many disadvantaged students that raises graduation rates over the years for, let's say from, I'm making this up, but from 20% to 40%, that university would have done something very impressive. But a family might still prefer to have their student at an institution where 60 or 80 or 90% of undergraduates are finishing their degrees on time. Remember also that rankings can change over time, sometimes for the better, and universities can have some influence over that process. US News, remember, was initially only about reputation. Now today, if you actually look at their breakdown, that factor makes up about 20% of the national ranking. Meantime, graduation rates, which includes, I think, quite an interesting measure of value added for students receiving Pell Grants, the graduation rates, when you add up all the different subcategories, that's up to about 35%. And with the future of the SAT being debated, of course, some people are very mad at US News for continuing to use that particular measure. There was even a petition last year from a prominent think tank in DC calling for US News to drop the use of test scores. But people don't pay quite as much attention to what's actually happening in the ranking because that factor has shrunk a tremendous amount over the years. SATs and ACT scores are now down to about 5% of the overall US News ranking. Now, maybe the consumer rankings have just gotten too caught up in the frenzy over college admissions for a tiny number of elite institutions. Fine, maybe you don't want to chase those rankings, but I would still take very seriously the importance of picking something else and trying to do well on it. Maybe it's the college scorecard measures or some other kinds of policy-oriented rankings. If you're a reformer, data and transparency can be your friend, and it can help the people you're trying to serve. Looking ahead, I think that there are a lot of smart people in universities who can look for different things to measure that are important and better ways of going about it. One obvious candidate is a fundamental question, which is how much are students actually learning in college? There are initiatives like the Collegiate Learning Assessment that have tried to tackle that, but they haven't really seen widespread acceptance. So my bottom line is that rankings in some form are here to stay, and that the challenge is to improve them and to harness them for the kind of reform that is most important to you. And with that said, I would love to hear your thoughts and to hear any questions or comments you might have. I see a hand up. I believe it's from Regent Leggett, but I am not sure whether I can get that person, whether I should have somebody else identify who's going to speak next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure the order, but I apologize if I'm out of order. Thank you for your presentation. This is a little baffling to me in a number of ways. This whole process is like riding on the back of a tiger. And if you fall off, it'll eat you alive. And so we are in fact stuck with this. And although you indicated that there are other entities that are involved in the ranking, but by and large, the US News is what I would call the SEC in this process. It dominates virtually everything out there. And so the question, as you've indicated at the end, that we are sort of stuck with riding the back of this tiger. And many of the institutions are fearful of getting off because, as I said before, it'll eat you. But the challenge, I think, is what are they measuring? who is doing the measuring and what impact does it have? A lot of what I see in response to that are sort of like inside the ballpark kinds of discussion, because right now it is the potential students who measure this and look at it. It is the parents, their donors, and others who look at this, whether it is actually correct or not. They make assessments about it. And where they go is, as I said before, to US News, the SEC in this process. So we're sort of stuck with this in a way. And that's the real challenge. And I'm not sure whether or not we should try to ride a new tiger or get off this one and get eaten alive, or just try to make the improvements on it. So those are the observations I make about this. And I brought this subject up because I've been dealing with it for a number of years, and I do know the impact of it. When you get those rankings, it is a real display of confidence, maybe for the wrong reason, and maybe it's too consumer oriented in terms of its approach. But it could have some deadly effects. If you fall off of it, that tiger's going to eat you alive.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's very thoughtful comment, Regent Leggett. And I should also just be very clear. I should have said this sooner. It's been many years since I worked at US News, but I left 15 years ago. So I in no way speak for that organization. I do think my broader point, though, is really where I would, I think that there may be things you could look at. Really, just it's all on the web. You could look at the methodology of US News, and if you agree that a value-added measure for graduation rates is something useful, taking low-income students, looking at a sort of projected graduation rate and seeing the institutions that overperform and underperform, that may be something. I mean, I would not presume to tell anybody how they want to approach this, but you might praise the aspects of the ranking that you think are helpful, and you might suggest some course corrections in some areas that you don't think are helpful. I do think that's one approach. But I would point out, as I've mentioned, there's just a tremendous amount within the higher ed world, pick up Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle of Higher Education. If you look at something like the new Carnegie Classification, it's looking at social mobility, that's a very different approach. I think it is tough. It's a little bit like the blind man and the elephant. It's tough to find, the optimal mixture. It really does depend. There are people who very much value, having, if you care about class size, then resources and spending is going to be important. It's easy to say, oh, spending is you're just rewarding the haves over the have-nots. But we all know that, in money is power in education to get things done, to hire new professors, to build new facilities, in some cases to provide, the kind of financial aid that's going to make it possible for students to attend. So I don't have a simple answer, but I do think that there are reasonable factors in some of the rankings that I think can be encouraged, but the final balance is probably never going to satisfy everybody.
Thank you.
Other questions, Hugh?
Sure, good. Mr. Waldowski, I'm kind of curious if there's a consensus that we're living in an age of accountability, and the consensus that our consumers, students and families are interested in this type of ranking. My question is, why wouldn't I guess all of higher institutions, whether it be present, some type of commission be formed to get some type of consensus on what the metrics would be that should be measured, so that you have some type of consensus on that, and that it's then the commission is done to do these type of studies, so that they're not done by maybe private enterprises like US News and World Report or other folks. So you kind of can create the type of report that higher education is blessed to say, these are the metrics that we think are really important for families to evaluate or consumers. And I guess that's my question, is why hasn't that been discussed or done?
Well, look, it's a wonderful question. I will try not to be cynical. I will say that there are certainly people over the years who feel that, you know, higher education, look, I'm a huge fan of American higher education, and, you know, both for what it has accomplished and for its promise to do much better on some measures in the future. But it's true that I think there has been, it's a very large, very diverse system. I think there is sometimes some insularity within the system. I think there are certainly lots of university presidents can tell you about their best departments and their best professors and their award winners and so forth. And of course, they love to brag on their accomplishments. But sometimes if you take somebody from the outside, like a magazine or maybe even a policy organization, people don't take too kindly to outsiders coming in and passing judgment. And I think the question is, I mean, certainly the Carnegie Classifications, you know, could be viewed as one form of, you know, the sector perhaps trying to adopt some of these measures itself. But as you know, it's hard to get, you know, two departments or two members of the faculty at one institution to agree with each other on everything, let alone going across the vast range of kinds of institutions with different priorities, with different admissions priorities, different funding structures, different aspirations as to whether their core mission is about serving students, workforce development for their region versus world-class research. Of course, everybody wants to say they are contributing to research because we know how important that is, as you heard earlier, for global competitiveness and so forth. But there has just been a lot of challenge getting this. I think arguably the variety of US higher education is part of its success, and the fact that it's not centralized, it's not top down, but that also makes it a very messy beast to try to get everybody to agree to a set of metrics. I think could be challenging. I do think something like the college scorecard, which is, you know, as I've said, is I think improving. I think the new Carnegie classifications, I do think there are some promising measures out there, but I'm afraid I can't give you a definitive roadmap as to how you ought to accomplish that.
Yes, Freeman.
Right. The most important point, I think, Ben, is that universities have found ways to either use it when the beauty contest works for them or to discount it when it does not. We all do that. We really do. The real question for the Regents will always be, are we able to attract the students that we're trying to attract and educate Maryland, for example? And I would say, for the most part, we are. We really are. We get some accolades from those, but people in education, though, they are beauty contests. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we know who's going to be at the top, right? We know it's the private and the bigger your endowment, all of that. So that's just the reality. I wish I could feel that higher education could come together and do something better or different. No, but we think so differently about these things. But the number one criterion has to be, can we attract the students and educate them well? And that has nothing to do with the ratings. It really doesn't. We want to graduate and we want to know they know certain things. Those would be the substantive issues we should focus on.
Thank you. Gary?
Just a question for the presidents, and I obviously what you said is, you know, our ultimate goal, but I've always wondered how actively do we manage to our rankings? Do we even look at it and plan for it? We're all managers here, right? Do we say, oh, you know, if we had 5% more donors who gave $1 each, we would be ahead of our competitor institution? So I just wondered if one or two of you could tell me. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I deferred.
Let me begin. Each year we review our rankings, not just for US News and World Reports, but there are many rankings out there from bestcolleges.com and the list goes on and on. What we do is to assess what we believe are meaningful measures of the institution, meaning we have very different institutions across the system, and making sure that we take into account some of the elements that were noted in the presentation this morning about our mission and who we bring into the institution. We're very much about upward mobility and making sure students have a pathway to success. So unlike Harvard, we're not looking, and I don't mean to single them out, but unlike other institutions, we are looking at access and making sure that our students come into our institution wherever they are HBCUs, including Bowie State University, meets those students where they are and provides access and affordability and that upward mobility and also success beyond completion of the degree. You don't often see that as a measure. 6 months out, a year out, where are our graduates? So while our measures it might look different or we might put a different emphasis, that's intentional because we don't look like Harvard. We don't look like some other institutions. So for me, it's about what are the meaningful measures that we need to evaluate, and are we living out our mission in the way that it's defined at Bowie State University?
We'll do Kurt and then Heidi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Regeneptment, what I've seen over the past few years of dealing with higher education, I've been at both public and private institutions. The rankings do play a significant role in professional education. The students look at law schools in particular. It really has an impact in dealing with where they apply to law school. I don't see it as having quite as big an impact in the undergraduate area. Students and the families look at a lot of other things related to the undergraduate education. For me, though, this whole, there's certain disingenuousness about all this. Ratings are one thing, rankings are another. And to do the ratings, just, you know, like the scorecard assessing each individual institution is one thing, but then to try to take 200 law schools and say who's going to be in number 54, and you bunch a number of them in there, which is what US News does, it's totally disingenuous. It's all commercial driven. But I'm sorry, Regent Leggett is right. We have to live with it. And to your point, it's a long way of getting to your point. You can game the system. You can. I have seen it in so many law schools. A decision will be made. I'm going to invest in marketing, increase my marketing dollars, so that section of the rankings where they say. What's the reputation like from other professors? Well, you know, if your reputation got locked in for something you did 15 years ago, you change it by a whole new marketing strategy. And so, yes, the system can be gamed in a lot of different ways, and many institutions are involved in it, particularly at the graduate and professional level.
So thank you, Madam Chair. And to your point of Regeneptment, I agree with my colleagues, and here's what I will add. I've been one of those individuals who have been gaming the system. And so I'll just tell you up front, when you go to a university where you're there to try to change the culture, which is what we're doing, trying to do at UMES, when you're trying to make sure you increase the motivation, you increase the enrollment, you look at this as an opportunity to say, how can I make sure I use the rankings, because students and parents do look at them. I agree that it's disingenuous, but this is what you're going to do from a standpoint of trying to attract the consumers, and it's important. To your point about how do you manage it, one of the things that we're doing at UMES when I arrived immediately was to get the cabinet and get individuals to understand what are the key indicators in those particular metrics. What is the methodology? And now let's see how we can work together to try to move that needle a little bit. So in the 4 years I've been there, we've already moved twice up in the rankings of US News. We're proud of that. Even though it is a part of gaming. We looked at our alumni giving and we said our alumni were not giving as much as they should. So we took the challenger of what's going on with it and turned it into an opportunity. And we've now doubled our alumni giving rate by going after them and making sure they understood what that meant. We've actually moved up a little bit with our graduation rate, the 6-year graduation rate. We focus on social mobility because we know as an HBCU, that's who we are, those students who we attract. So I agree with our speaker in that you look for those particular rankings that fit your profile. And for us, it's about social mobility. It's about making sure we get kids across the finish line and graduated. And that's what we really focus on. And I think all of my presidents here would agree that we all do the same kind of thing. But it is something you do try to manage and really look at it from a priority standpoint. They're not, as the speaker said, rankings are here to last. And we have to figure out a way to really work around it.
Yes, Bruce.
Just a quick comment. I totally agree with what President Smoke said about law schools. It has an undue influence on the law school rankings, U.S. News and World Report. And it's very sensitive to gaming. As mentioned, more importantly, I think decisions that get made about gaming aren't always in the best interest of a school or the faculty or the students. The other comment I would make relative to Regent Breslin's comment, the dental schools, or at least a large share of them, have opted out of this and no longer will participate. So you can do it, but it takes a lot of resolve.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Oh, yes.
I think that we're at fault of this too, in terms of higher education. If you look at our websites, they're marketing documents. They do not provide the kind of information that students and their families are looking for in very accessible form. Rankings are proxies for brand. They're also used in terms of a replacement for information search. We make it very, very difficult on our websites to have families and students get the kind of information that they would want to be able to use in terms of making decisions. And we don't standardize in terms of being able to do it. There's a saying, if you don't like what category you're in, invent another one. We do that and we maximize our marketing expertise within higher education itself. So to fault the rankings or to fault the students and their families in terms of making use of something when we don't give them another tool to be able to do the same assessment, we need to really look at ourselves first.
Just to add to it, I agree with all of them. First of all, it's really nice to hear a lawyer using math, talking about ratings versus ranking. But the other point is that we will be, as Ben as several people have said, we will be riding the tiger. It is marketing more than anything else. But for the Regents, are our students graduating? Do they get jobs? Someone said, or do they go to grad school? Are we preparing them to be good citizens in society? Those are the substantive issues. You get a little of that from the rankings, but those are the questions that you want to be raised. And do we bring in enough students, quite frankly? Those are the fundamental challenges.
Any other? Oh, Doug? Mm-hmm.
etc. And of course, they're going to win every time.
Right.
And so my position, at least with the rankings, is they increase the achievement gap, in my opinion, because those individuals are going to find either publicly or privately how to fund their kids. And I see myself as more of a navigator. That's what I did, in public office, is I would have so many kids write me. They were the first to graduate from high school. So you're starting with a kid who none of his peers have ever gone, or his brothers and sisters have gone. So I see our system as, in my opinion, ranking. How do we handle all these different individuals? To me, somebody coming from a background like that, getting a college degree, is much more impressive than going to an Ivy League school. And they're going to start to build economically in that area. Now, this other sad part about it is when you read about the rankings, companies decide where to go. This was a huge factor for Amazon when they were looking around here. So it is with us. There's a way, I think, to fight it, but I think we really need to say, here's what we're starting with. We're already ahead of the curve. That was part of our budget pitch. We need more funding to give more financial aid because we're losing individuals who are taking 2-3 years of school and then dropping out. So that's how I see the rankings for us, is that, within a system, we're finding a path for a student in all of our 12 schools and even the community college, because another issue is remediation. We're starting out with some kids who are graduating, then they're going to community college and they don't have the basics already. So anyway, just some thoughts.
Yeah. Anyone else have? Ada?
just a brief question. I know President Chancellor, you mentioned that sometimes the information that students and families are looking for isn't readily available on the websites, and that's linked to what you're doing with rankings and ratings. Could you talk a little bit if rankings are mostly based on marketing and we're not supposed to go to the websites, or the information is not on the websites, where should students and families look for information about universities that they're interested in?
So what I basically took, just to clarify, is the fact that because there's not a place on the website that provides the information, what happens is it's hard to be able to navigate the website to be able to find it. We often use different phrasing too. So instead of people having the ability to be able to find that information, they'll just use the rankings as a proxy for the information that they're looking to be able to do. The other issue, as Kurt brought up, is the fact that rankings and ratings are two different things. And if you look at the #1 university and the number 100 university, it's an ordinal scale. There could be infinitesimal, not even statistically significant differences between those universities. So it's really, when you're looking at the cost of education, to be able to find the information on the website, I just think is something that's our responsibility. The scorecard does that in some part, but to be able, and we also know that students are looking at different things. Some students want to go to a university that has certain degree programs. We can all talk about the fact that we have students that apply to the universities that we're part of, and they'll mark on their application what they want to major in, and we don't even offer that major. So, the level of information search that's used by families and students is really an interesting thing to be able to take a look at. And unfortunately, the rankings are a proxy, and it's a tool that they use, and often it's misused.
Yes, Andy? Oh, Ada, you follow on?
Okay, without being too provocative, but a little bit provocative, it feels to me like there's a little bit of tension between the first presentation we heard on science and then this conversation. Like, I think of science as empirical measures, quantitative measures, being transparent about what you're measuring, independent variables, dependent variables, and we celebrated that. And then when a bunch of people try to apply those kind of scientific methods to what we're doing, we get a little bit uneasy with what it spits out, and we start asking some tougher questions about it. So is the point here that maybe these methods aren't scientific enough, or they're going about them the wrong way, or are some of these rankings just telling us some tough things, like science sometimes has a way of doing?
Here's the point. Much of what we talk about is ratings and rankings, quite frankly, will seem quantitative when it's simply objective. Or which school is better than another? Which school do you know better, right? But there are ways that we help people know what we care about. Just one example, thinking about when Regent Peters was in the legislature began asking universities, what % of your students are first generation college? And it made all of us 10, 15 years ago, much more aware of that. We all can take great pride in having larger and larger numbers of first generation college, right? And a lot of families that may be that would like to know, how do first generation college students do on your campus? And that can be very quantitative, because we'll talk about graduation rates, right? So we do have those measures. We're all using analytics more than ever. And that's quite quantitative in looking at trends as we try to increase retention and graduation rates. So the point is, we do use science with some other things. I think our marketer who talked math today too, Dr. Kemp, the fact is that we use the ratings, we write it down. It helps us sometimes when it's good news, the system will use the best value, those kinds of things. But the gravitas comes with some of these other more substantive ways that we help families know whether young people can make it. And the % of students who are over 30 years, wanting families to know who's at your campus and how they're doing. That's the critical part of what we need to do.
If I can just add one small piece of this, the reason why I was trying to be a little bit provocative on this is I think it's worth discussing whether or not we think these things just have the metrics wrong. And the discussion that we're having here is often about that, which is great. Then we can get to more clarity. But it's a different category of discussion if I might get this wrong, what's the old saying? Not everything that counts can be counted and not everything that is counted counts? Are we saying that there's something about this entire enterprise trying to quantify, empiricize this that is going to get us off the rails? Those are two different things. Let's get the metrics right, but are we going to say out loud something about institutions of higher education can't be measured and this enterprise of trying to do so warps our behavior?
I love what Heidi said when she talked about using it to help the campus in looking at graduation rate, for example, in getting more people to be donors. I mean, there are ways in which it can be helpful. We don't want to be so cynical to say it's only marketing. People have used it to help compare. When you see a campus like yours and they have a high graduation rate, you want to know why. Why is it they have more first generation students than we have? So in those ways, it can be positive. We just need to put it in perspective.
Yeah, I hate to stop this very robust discussion, but we do have to continue with the agenda. I want to thank Dr. Wadowski and thank Regent Leggett for introducing this topic. Clearly, it's something we're all interested in and all want to understand. And it's nice to hear that we care that it's both quantitative and qualitative, and we can use it to our benefit whenever we understand it. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chancellor Perman, who's going to do the Chancellor's report.
And thank Dr. Wadowski for sending us money for his dog, that check.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
That's the idea. I should have let you have the closing word.
Well, good morning, everybody. What a morning this has been already. Thank you, Chair Gooden. I too want to thank Mr. Wadowski for his presentation. I've already applauded Dr. Fraser. It's terrific to be with you this morning. It's terrific to be with you during Black History Month. If you'll allow me, it was a shame, literally a shame, that we had to begin this month in higher education, not with a celebration, but with condemnation. Condemnation of bomb threats made at 2 of our HBCUs and many more across the country. So if you'll allow me, I'll say today in our important Board of Regents meeting what I said then, that these threats will fail. If they were meant to restrict access to higher education, they will fail. If they were meant to sow division, they will fail. If they were meant to terrorize our students and communities of color, they will fail. Because you can't suppress Black excellence and you cannot snuff out the light of our HBCUs. We stand with Bowie and Coppin and UMES, our constituent institutions of which we're very proud, now and always. Of course, I thank our hosts this morning, UMB and President Bruce Jarrell. Let me start there. It's impossible to overstate how vital UMB has been to the system's pandemic response and to the state's. The work of UMB, the work of its partner, the University of Maryland Medical System, has steered us through the eye of the storm. Their leadership of the Unified Command has guided our path and secured Maryland's success in managing through the crisis. It's backbreaking work, it's heartbreaking work, and they've been doing it for 2 years. I can't thank them enough. Returning to UMB is still a special homecoming for me. I'm not going to hide it. And it still brings me great pride. You all know that UMB made headlines around the world since we last met, when surgeons from our School of Medicine performed the first ever successful transplant of a pig's heart into a human patient. This is poised to revolutionize xenotransplantation, transplantation of organs. And that will give hope to thousands of patients who die each year awaiting an organ transplant, a great achievement. The NSF has just, dare I say the word, ranked the combined research enterprise of UMB and College Park in the top 10 among US public universities and the top 20 among all universities. And the UMB College Park Alliance continues to impress with the Institute of Bioscience and Biotechnology Research, you all know it as IBBR, announcing a nearly $17 million investment from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which we know as NIST. The Maryland Poison Center, which sits 2 floors down from where my office used to be, so I know it well. It's operated by UMB School of Pharmacy. It's turning 50 this year. And what's important is that the center over that time has consulted on more than 1.5 million poison exposure cases, saving, I am sure, thousands of lives. The Cure Scholar Program here at UMB is celebrating an amazing milestone. So pertinent, it occurs to me, in view of what Dr. Fraser talked to us about this morning. You'll recall that this mentoring program introduces West Baltimore students, our neighborhood kids who live over there, to STEM discovery starting in middle school. Well, I'm happy to report to you that the very first class of Cure Scholars are off to college this fall. And those scholars, 20 high school seniors, have racked up 72 offers of admission to 44 colleges, many of them represented right here. I remember them as 6th graders, as 11-year-olds in their very first lab coats. And yes, I'm overwhelmed. So thank you. Thank you, Bruce. I thank UMB for its excellence, but of course, there's no shortage of excellence across the system. I'll give you just a sampling. Dare I mention rankings? US News and World Report. Gotta play the game. Released its best, now this is important. It's best online programs for 2022. And 7 of our universities are recognized. Right here at UMB, School of Nursing had 2 of its master's programs, Masters in Nursing Administration, Masters in Nursing Education, ranked in the top 5 nationwide. Frostburg made the list for its bachelor's programs and MBA programs. Salisbury got the nod for its MBA and Masters in Nursing. Towson for its Masters in Education and Masters in IT. UBalt for its MBA. UMBC for its Masters in IT. And College Park for its Masters in Engineering and MBA, both ranked at number 12. In a different ranking, UMGC is number 1 on the US News list of colleges that enroll the most transfer students UMGC enrolled more than 9,500 new transfer students in fall 2020, significantly more than its nearest competitor. And this is very important to us, to our state leaders, because they are on us. They are on higher education, so that we strengthen our transfer student pipeline and support them to success. And if you will, one more word on rankings. Towson ranked 27th among best public undergrad business school by Poets and Quants magazine. They came in at number 17 in the career outcomes measure, number 4 in diversity. Nearly half of last year's incoming business
I just need to get
at Towson identify as underrepresented minorities. And I know with President Chancellor's business background, she is very proud of all of this, as are we. Well done. So let me talk about students for a minute and get away from the rankings. You can find the artwork of Bowie State senior Sharon Townsend on clothing and bags when you are doing your Target store shopping nationwide. He's one of 3 students to win that store's HBCU Design Challenge marking Black History Month. 2 College Park seniors, Stephen Jin and Naveen Rahman, have won the prestigious Winston Churchill Scholarship, joining just 16 students nationwide. The scholarship provides full tuition and stipend for a master's degree at the University of Cambridge. UMBC senior Joshua Slaughter won the Marshall Scholarship. He'll pursue his PhD in informatics at the University of Edinburgh with the goal of advancing equity in personalized medicine. 6 UMGC students have been named finalists for the Presidential Management Fellows Program. That's a prominent leadership development program specifically for graduate students. Jay Copeland, a recent Salisbury alum, who sang, Chuck, you remember this? At your inauguration, will compete on the 20th season of American Idol. And James Ruffin, the first graduate of U-Balt's, and you've heard about this, all of you, incredible Second Chance college program, will use his BA in Human Services Administration to help others who are transitioning to life after prison. We need to follow his example, in my opinion. Let me switch then to our university leaders. Yes, you know this, but I'm going to say it again. On Wednesday came news that UMBC President Freeman Hrabowski was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. It's a big deal whenever it happens. Our president of College Park, Daryl Pines, was inaugurated 3 years ago. It's a big deal, but it's a special big deal here because it's exceedingly rare that someone who's not an engineer, that's correct, Freeman, isn't it? Someone who's not an engineer is offered membership in the academy.
Yay, math.
Yeah, but it's not just math. Here's why Freeman got the nod. He got the nod for his role in revolutionizing how we open access to engineering education and nurture student success among those who've not been part of that professional community. That's why he got the nod. You can talk about mathematics.
but it is inspiring that Daryl Pines is already a member. I really want to give him credit for that. Would you all give Daryl Pines a round of applause?
I'm not finished with our presidents. UMES President Heidi Anderson, Coppin State President Anthony Jenkins were named among the 10 most dominant HBCU leaders of 2022. That came from the HBCU Campaign Fund. And President Jenkins and our very own Regent Michelle Gourdine joined the Baltimore Sun's list of 25 Black Marylanders to watch. Kurt, in the same edition, the Sun named 5 living legends. And there's one of them. We didn't need the Sun. We all consider you a legend. I also want to call attention to a profile of President Schmoke that ran in the Sun. It talked about Kurt's return to the classroom as a co-teacher of a course on Baltimore City's history. Now, if you were a student in his class, what a gift. To be able to see behind the decisions that have shaped the city, that have helped shape the city they live in. So congratulations for doing that. Several members of Frostburg's leadership team, including President Nowotchik, were honored with Impact Leader Awards from the National Society of Leadership and Success. This is an award that recognizes commitment to developing engaged and powerful student leaders. And then let me turn to the institutions that these leaders are guiding. UMCES has issued a first ever report card on Maryland's coastal adaptation to climate change. Maryland is especially endangered by a changing climate as it relates to the coast, given that 72% of our population lives and works along literally thousands of miles of shoreline. The report card, which gave Maryland a B- overall, highlights progress, highlights threats, and establishes a framework for resiliency in the face of climate crisis. And I would report to you that UMCES has also launched a NOAA-funded study of microplastics moving through Maryland's waterways, tracking where the plastics come from and where they end up. And we're looking forward to UMCES' further work, which is going to provide the science that lawmakers need to take meaningful action on marine debris. This week, the universities at Shady Grove launched its 10-year strategic plan, USG 2.0, laying out ambitions to pioneer change in access and affordability, equity, and opportunity. I call Shady Grove our crucible for innovation because USG gives the system a laboratory to be the innovators that we always promise to be, the innovators that our learners, our employers, and our communities deserve. And that's because at least 9 of the institutions already come together there. So you have a special opportunity. And USG isn't alone in this. All 3 of our regional centers, Shady Grove, the USM at Hagerstown, the USM at Southern Maryland, they give us a structure to revolutionize how we might meet and serve our learners close to where they live and how we prepare them better for fulfilling careers. Coppin State is one of 6 HBCUs nationwide selected by Complete College America to take part in a digital learning infrastructure project. This is a $2.5 million research and design initiative, which is going to build an integrated framework for digital learning at HBCUs. Coppin was selected for its track record of innovation, its commitment to student success, and for its novel use of technology to deliver exceptional learning experiences. UMBC has won a Beckman Foundation Award to launch a Beckman Scholars Program for 6 students who aspire to MD, PhD degrees, physician scientists. Can't get enough of those. Only 14 institutions across the country are new recipients of this 3-year award. And I would point out that UMBC already produces more Black graduates who earn the MD, PhD than any other US university. At College Park, Professor Emeritus Michael Brin, his wife Eugenia, and the Sergey Brin Family Foundation are establishing the Brin Mathematics Research Center with a gift of $4.75 million. The center is going to expand math and statistics research and education programs, support visiting scholars, workshops, symposia. The goal is to foster interactions between mathematicians at College Park and those around the world. And in yet another nod to College Park's quantum leadership, Analytics Insight ranked University of Maryland among the top 10 universities worldwide for quantum research, joining, yes, Harvard, Berkeley, the University of Tokyo, China's University of Science and Technology. Bowie State has partnered with the US Census Bureau to support students studying data science and analytics to help build a high-quality, diverse workforce in this growing field. And UBalt's School of Law is joining with Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Services, the state's largest provider of pro bono civil legal services, in a grant from the US Justice Department to significantly expand their human trafficking prevention project. The project supports survivors of human trafficking and those populations at high risk of exploitation. And finally, there's so much to talk about. All of it's in the report I've given you. This is just a sampling, and I know I've been long. Finally, as you all know by now, UMBC has just reached the Carnegie Classifications highest level of research performance, earning Research 1 status. I want to congratulate again Freeman and his team because this is an achievement for them and for the system. I know you are happy for these words. I'm going to conclude my remarks by commenting. I always have Regent Neal's support. I want to comment on the governor's budget proposal for the system. Nobody knows better than all of you how enormously challenging the last 2 years have been in terms of budget cuts, revenue losses, how deeply they've affected the work we do. And so the governor's FY23 proposal of $1.67 billion in state support to the system is incredibly gratifying for so many reasons. It's an 11.5% increase over our FY22 appropriation. It fully restores the $94 million that was cut from the USM's base budget in July 2020, when people were worried about state revenue projections. Importantly, it includes new funding for important initiatives. But I also want to note that Governor Hogan's state budget proposal provides an additional $198 million to cover cost of living and merit increases for our hardworking USM employees. After a couple of years of watching our faculty and staff work so very hard to make sure our students kept learning and our scholarship kept making change. 2 years of keeping our employees and our students safe and our campuses operational. I'm deeply grateful to see their efforts further acknowledged in this way. And if the legislature approves all budget actions, the system overall is looking at a nearly 25% increase over our FY22 appropriation. I should also note that Chair Gooden and I will be leaving today's meeting briefly to testify before lawmakers on the USM office proposed operating budget. It's an important opportunity for me on your behalf to remind legislators just how much the system office accomplishes on a very small budget, how well we manage our resources. I'm going to tell them, because it's the data, that in terms of what we manage on centrally, I think it's the third smallest among all systems in the country. And to that last point, managing our resources, I'll note that Regeneptment will share with you later in the meeting this is hot off the press, performance at yesterday's bond auction. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I will say that we did better than expected. In fact, we expected to do very well, and we did better than we expected. But he'll tell you the news. Money was made, money was saved, which will fund important projects system-wide. Our auction performance followed incredibly strong bond ratings again, AA1, AA+, and in these times in higher education with a stable outlook. They are a testament to how well you all manage and how well Ellen Herbst and her team do their job. Thank you all for that, and happily, Madam Chair, for all of you, that concludes my report.
Good morning. I'm sorry, I can't hear Chair Gooden, so I'm not sure if I think I'm up next on the agenda.
Yes,
okay.
Dr. you're up next. Thank you.
Wonderful. Sorry, I don't think your microphone was on, so I couldn't hear from here, but I'm pretty sure. So thank you. Hopefully folks can hear me. If anybody that's near the camera can just give a thumbs up that you're able to hear, that would be great.
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Gooden, Chancellor Perman, members of the board, presidents, guests. I am so sorry that I'm not able to be there in person today. I always love meeting with this group, but I very much appreciate being able to join virtually online. I am actually leaving as soon as I'm done giving my report to hop on my first flight since February 2020 to attend the National Annual Conference on the First Year Experience and to present on some of our wonderful first year programs at UMBC. So I'm very excited for that opportunity and everything that has made it possible for us to start to get back to some of those types of events. So that's why I'm not there in person today. But I do have just a few quick highlights from my report that I wanted to share. I think the biggest thing, and this is on everybody's radar right now and ties very closely to the last update that the Chancellor shared, is that we will be hosting our annual Joint Council Advocacy Day next Wednesday, February 16th. This year, again, we'll be hosting that event virtually. But we are very much looking forward to that day and advocating on behalf of our amazing system. That is a collaborative effort between the faculty council, the student council, the staff council, and as of last year, we're also working with the USM Women's Forum. So several of our groups representing all of our constituent populations coming together to really advocate for everything that we do across the system. And we'll be doing that online. We do have a very robust agenda for the day, including a kickoff with Chancellor Perman and some folks from the USM office. And then we're looking forward to meeting with as many delegates as we're able to that day to kind of share our message throughout the day, as well as having some open forum space and time to talk about everything that's happening. So hopefully it will be a great day, even though we'll be online. And I will look forward to sharing a recap from Advocacy Day at the next board meeting once we've hosted that event on Wednesday. And of course, it's one of the great opportunities for our councils to come together. We've done that so much more the past couple of years, but this hasn't always been, but for the past several years, this has been something that we've done together. And we're looking forward to doing so again this year to have such a strong, united message. The only other update that I wanted to share from my report is that we have, for CUS, we have sent out our annual shared governance survey. We did add some questions to the survey this year to really get some logistical information about how shared governance has looked at each of our campuses during the pandemic and how things have maybe changed. And hoping that the state of shared governance is still strong at each of our institutions, despite being online and then being hybrid and still being in a mixed place with meetings and things like that. So we will look forward to collecting that data. And then my vice chair and I will put together our annual report about the state of shared governance across the system on behalf of staff. That will go as a full report to the chancellor and the board, and then as individual institutional reports to each of the presidents for how shared governance is looking at each campus. I highly recommend, and I put this out there now so that once those reports come out, that presidents plan to follow up with your staff shared governance units. We have done this at UMBC. We had a chance to meet with Dr. Rabowski and the President's Council to kind of go through the results of this survey, and a super productive conversation, and just thinking about some changes that we can make to shared governance, even if the report shows things are going well. As Dr. Rabowski always says, success is never final, right? So we are always working to improve the way that we do shared governance and represent our staff at each of our campuses. So hopefully I will have those reports out by the April board meeting, if not by the summer, and we can kind of go from there. The only other thing I have to share is that CUS will not meet in February. We spend a lot of our time preparing for Advocacy Day in February, so we forego our February meeting, but we will meet in March. I believe on March 16th, we'll be hosted virtually at UMBC. So we're looking forward to that meeting and hopefully picking up some of our additional items once we get through Advocacy Day next week. That concludes my report. I am happy to answer any questions, but if folks do have questions, just make sure that your mic is on so I'm able to hear. Thank you very much.
All right, any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you and safe travels and good luck on your presentation. And so now we will turn to the University Systems of Presidents report by Dr. Bro.
Thank you, Chair Gooden, and good morning. Good morning, Regents, and good morning, colleagues and everyone. Happy Black History Month. It's good to be before you. Before I begin my remarks, I do want to acknowledge and thank the Chancellor for his comments this morning in light of the recent threats to our HBCUs. Thank you for what you said today, but throughout this incident, the support that you have given to our HBCUs. We greatly appreciate your public statements, but your ongoing support throughout the year. Please give the Chancellor a round of applause. I also want to extend on behalf of CUS my acknowledgement and recognition and congratulations to our colleagues on all of the many achievements. I will not go over the list each day. I'm opening up the paper and President Rabowski, I think, is making this a daily occurrence. So the list goes on and on. Congratulations, colleagues, on all of your achievements. I do have in the book the written report from the Council of University System Presidents. We continue to convene on a regular basis on matters related to COVID-19. And beginning of each month, we are meeting, but also we're continuing to meet weekly with the Council of University System Presidents and our teams to address COVID-19. In December and into January, CUSP has focused primarily on the Omicron COVID-19 variant, and the presidents discussed their plans for the winter and spring semesters, including the telework and virtual learning options during the height of the surge. Other topics explored included vaccinations, continued encouragement of vaccine boosters. By now, I believe you are all aware that we have mandated across the system the requirement of boosters for our residential population. We also have discussed COVID-19 dashboards on our campuses and the stress on the state's healthcare system. The January 10th and February 7th CUSP meetings covered a wide variety of system-wide issues. Vice Chancellor Hogan provided legislative updates at both meetings covering the bills that may affect the system. Vice Chancellor Herbst also provided a budget update, and you heard from the Chancellor earlier with regard to the implications for the system. Other topics discussed included shared governance, the support of Afghan refugees, required reporting, and the VSU climate job fair that is coming up that we hope will serve as a template and a model to deliver and address climate change across the system. Before I conclude my remarks, I would like to acknowledge that we have a special guest joining us today. And to introduce that special guest, I'm going to call forward President Satchel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Bro. For over 5 decades, there's been thousands of vice presidents, deans, department chairs, and other faculty members that have participated in the American Council of Education Fellows Program. That Fellows Program is a learning experience that enables these individuals to immerse themselves in the study as well as the practice of leadership in higher ed. This unique program provides the opportunity and is known as the most prestigious and comprehensive leadership development program in higher education in the United States. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Carrie-Ann O'Meara. Carrie-Ann, would you stand up, please? We are so excited and we are so privileged to be able to be hosting Carrie-Ann at Towson University and my hosting her as well. She is a professor of higher education and a distinguished scholar teacher at the University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. O'Meara's research examines faculty careers and academic reward systems with a focus on organizational practices that support and limit the full participation of women faculty and underrepresented faculty, something that we've been talking about this morning. Her current NSF-funded projects examine equity-minded reform of hiring, member faculty workload, faculty evaluation, and discretionary spaces. Dr. O'Meara serves as the director of the University of Maryland's Advanced Program, a network of senior women leaders who mentor colleagues in their colleges each year, the Associate Dean of the College of Education, and Special Assistant to her president for strategic initiatives. In 2020, she served as president of the Association for the Study of Higher Education. As I said, she joined us this January, and we are thrilled to be hosting her on our campus. Thank you, everybody. Round of applause for Dr. O'Meara.
Thank you, President Schatzel. This now concludes my report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Dr. Brow? Seeing none, we will move on to the University System of Maryland Student Council. Ms. Harper.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. I'm going to keep it really quick, just to give us back some time. Good morning, Chair Gooden and Board of Regents, Presidents. Layla already touched on Advocacy Day. You guys have a report from me, so I won't get into that. We do have a meeting this Sunday, so it'll be our first meeting for the spring semester. As the students are coming back. I had a chance to have one-on-ones with the students throughout the winter break. I had Chancellor chats with Chancellor Perman. Those were good, right? those were very good. The students had a large variety of topics of the things that they want us to address. Of course, mental health was big. Students are exhausted. They are very exhausted with a variety of things. The incidents that are happening at our HBCUs, absolutely. COVID is big. Day-to-day life, family life, jobs, school, just name something. It's that. How do we address these things? How do we don't know. We have to ask the questions. We're surveying. Ada is definitely going to have a presentation on Sunday to ask these questions. And she's like, give me some time on the agenda, Yvonne, I need it. I need to ask the questions. I need to get more from the students. So I appreciate her leadership for that. She's like, I need to do more in my position. So really thank you for that. I really appreciate you stepping up for that. Other topics that they want to know more: financial literacy of how do they pay back that student tuition? How do they engage in knowing about the debt they are carrying while they're in school? We don't talk about that a lot. We say, come to school. We don't say how you pay it back. We don't say, hey, we have this opportunity for you when you get out of school. They need mentorships. They need to know. We talked about STEM earlier today. How do we get those STEM mentorships? How do we get people like us in the business? So they asked about that. They asked about public safety. It's a lot of things happening around the campuses that they live. We're in the middle of Baltimore City right now. I go to school in the University of Baltimore. I love my school. And yes, I am learning under a living legend, and I love my school in Midtown. And it's safe. It's very safe in Midtown, but you go east or west, it's not. So public safety around that. So those were things that we talked about one-on-one. We're going to continue those topics to go on throughout the spring semester. Other things that we talked about town hall in December and January. And we're planning that. They have a meeting right now going on. So Ada, you're gonna help me with that too. Tola, you're gonna help me with that as well. But they're in the middle of planning that right now. The mental health that we stole from Bowie. Thank you, President Rowe. We're still planning that. So that's what we've been working on in the winter. I feel like I'm leaving one more thing. I'm just trying to give you guys some time back. So Sunday we have a meeting, and then we'll follow back up next month. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda, if I could.
Any questions? I'm sorry.
I would love to follow up with you on financial literacy.
Yes, please. And if anyone wants to come to a meeting, I would love to have someone come to the meeting. I know Chancellor Perman is going to join us next month. We would love to have you come into a meeting and talk to the students because we want them to understand student fees. I know they don't like me to say this, but we need student fees to operate the system. But if anyone want to ever come in, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Dr. Brune will offer the university system faculty report.
Good morning, Chair Gooden,
morning.
Regents and presidents. This has been a very illuminating day, so I too will try to keep this very brief. I don't want to repeat things, but there are several attachments to the report that I gave to you all, and I would urge you to read them because a lot of what we've been doing in the last month after our January meeting has been to follow up on these. It was very much a working meeting. We have 3 surveys that are out. We've had to extend them. Today is the last deadline for collection of responses, largely because of the communication, faculty being off campus, not really working and on break and things of that nature. So we've had to push out our deadlines in collecting the information. Hopefully we will have results from all these surveys. I want to emphasize that these surveys are attitudinal in nature. There are many open questions. So summarizing the information given, the responses given takes some time. So hopefully in March we will be able to present that information to you. They are on COVID-19, technology, and the academic integrity. In addition to that, we have of course been working with Layla. Unfortunate she left, but you know, Layla does a wonderful job with, and her people do a marvelous job in putting these councils together to work with Advocacy Day. So I really always want to give her kudos because her organizational skills are something that an Army could use for sure. The Rules and Means Committee is just doing some work on our updating things. So you will probably see some of that later on in the year coming to you with changes to our Constitution. And we have made changes to bylaws, but the constitutional changes are really updates, trying to make sure we get everybody's name correct and everybody is addressed properly. It hasn't been done in a while. Recently too, at our January meeting, we passed a resolution on mental health to try to, for faculty members, to make sure that we really wanted them to understand the complexity of flexibility, which is a conversation that faculty have been having a lot of lately. You know, how far do we go in being flexible with students and still being able to maintain the deadline, to maintain that the information that's being taught is well discussed and not, you know, amongst the group, working with their peers and things of that nature. So it's been a conversation, but more importantly, we really felt that it was important for us to get to our colleagues to say, it isn't enough just to look at, you know, this idea of flexibility with deadlines, but to look at how you're conducting your class, and not, is it wellness oriented? Is it positive in attitude? And I think that's very important. And also, if there's any way in which you might be considering doing some training with the counselors of your school to perhaps help support their needs and to be able to work with students. And so this resolution is very much was approved unanimously. We had one abstention, but that was because this was an alternate who wasn't prepared. And didn't feel they could vote. And I think that's a very fair thing. But in terms of support, it was very strongly felt. And we do have upcoming in our February meeting, the head counselor from UMBC will be there to talk to us about this faculty development training that we might hopefully will support. Further, Vice Chair Dr. Arian Tatum is working with Dr. Bro's office to discuss our shared governance report, which will be coming out hopefully by the end of the month or certainly the first week in March. But we wanted to try to get at this concept of consensus of role and responsibilities, trying to make sure that we can close gaps between how administration and faculty feel they're working together. And last but not least, we did join in support of the Chancellor's remarks about the HBCUs because, as he said, there's nobody, he said it very eloquently, and I don't think that we can say more than what he did. And that is it. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Dr. Brune? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Dr. Brune, for your report. It's now time for the public comment as outlined in the board's guidelines for public comment. Those who wish to speak must submit comments in writing 48 hours in advance, and the topic of comments address topics on the current agenda. In the last 24 hours, we've received requests for public comments. The topic of these requests relates to USM's vaccination protocols. I want to thank those individuals who took the time to share their thoughts. This topic is not on today's agenda, and so I will share the comments with the board in the coming days. Seeing as we received no comments related to today's meeting topics, I will move directly to the consent agenda.
Madam Chairman, could I get we had the public comment that came out of order at the beginning, and all the commenters or whatever, they were protesting, and their sign about hazardous pay and fairness from ASME. Could we just get a brief synopsis of what they were talking about from the Chancellor or from Council Bainbridge?
I think we can after we do the consent agenda and we go to the committee of the whole. Okay. Excuse me. The next order of business is the consent agenda. Decisions regarding which items to include on the consent agenda were made by me and the committee chairs. However, any regent may request that an item be removed from the consent agenda for separate review and discussion. Before I move approval of the consent agenda, I ask if there are any items that any regent would like removed from the consent agenda for separate review and discussion. Are there any items to be removed? Okay, seeing none on Zoom or in the room, I move approval of all. Yes. Okay, I move approval of all the items on the consent agenda. Do I have a second? Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. So the next item of business is the committee reports. First, we'll hear from Regeneptment and the Finance Committee, followed by an update from Regent. Regent Fish, did we remove that item? Yes. Finally, we'll end with a committee of the whole, which includes presentations on the strategic plans, both the University of Maryland College Park and the universities at Shady Grove. But Gary, before we do your report, we'll let the Chancellor address Regent Pope's question.
Well, I should probably start by saying that what I'm going to say in terms of your question as to what it was about, I don't know for sure. We had word that members of AFSCME would appear here at the meeting. We were not clear as to what it is that they were here to say or protest. Having said that, just as a brief summary, following which I'm going to have Vice Chancellor Herbst comment more specifically on a meeting they alluded to. I think that the public is aware and this body is aware that over the last several years, matters of legislation weave their way through the General Assembly with a request by the union that labor negotiations be handled centrally, be handled at the University System of Maryland office itself, and specifically by the Chancellor, rather than by the individual universities. It's a complex matter for several reasons, and believe me, in response to your question, Regent Pope, it's certainly not my place to relitigate something that's become law. Having said that, and in an effort to provide clarity, the issues for us were the fact, and I often say this to our elected officials, the strength, the beauty of this university system is not its homogeneity, it's its heterogeneity. The institutions are all different. They reside in different places. And on top of it, also in legislation is the fact that they have autonomy to run their institutions. These are all real issues that may portray us as obstinate, but they are the fact. I better not use a particular franchise, so pick the fast food franchise you want. We are not 12, okay, I'll say it, McDonald's or Wendy's or whatever, where it would be terrible if we were, in my opinion, so that all matters can be dealt with centrally. Having said that,
we absolutely intend to obey the law and make it work. So as a result, I notified the union that we are ready to bargain over issues that they think should be bargained, and I have the prerogative to do this. I am appointing people to represent me. There was an allusion made to them. In fact, a first discussion occurred last Friday. My understanding is that the issue that bargaining was requested on was on something that I believe is positive, namely the fact that you all voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Having said that, yes, causes salary compression, and that needs to be worked out. That was the subject of the meeting, as far as I know.
Right.
Ellen.
No, I don't think Ellen. I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think
that's the best I can do.
I haven't seen that before.
Okay. Thank you, Regent Pope, and we'll turn it over to Regeneptment for the financial report.
Trying to get the green light to come on here. There it goes. I assume you can hear me. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you will hear, we had a very informative and impactful Finance Committee meeting last week, and there's finance news breaking out all over the place this week, and I'll try to summarize it. But first, I'd like to say, all of our Finance Committee meetings are great. This was a particularly interesting and impactful one. We have an incredible committee. We have 2 former state senators, we have CPAs, a bank officer, attorneys, and real estate professionals. So you can imagine there's a lot of really good discussion in the room and a lot of good things to talk about. Before I get to the actual news, I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of our committee, and I assume all the regions, to the governor and our elected officials for their continuing and incredible support of the USM. As the Chancellor mentioned, and I'll get into some more detail, Governor Hogan's FY23 budget proposal for the University System of Maryland was extremely supportive of our mission and sends a very clear message that the state of Maryland truly values higher education, especially public higher education. This budget allowance, together with the proposed capital improvement program, will advance our mutual priorities of education, innovation, workforce development, and economic growth, thereby creating a higher quality of life throughout the state. I would strongly encourage everyone here today, to the extent you can, to be advocating for the adoption of the governor's operating and capital budget submissions. And here they are. Regarding FY22, which is this year until June 30th, and 23, the first in FY22, so for this current year, starting in January, the USM will receive a $70 million payment for salary increases, supporting a 1% cost of living increase, which we call COLA, 2.5% merit increment, and one-time $1,500 bonuses. These funds are in the DBM personnel budget and will be transferred to the USM. And as we've said throughout this meeting, these salary increases and others pertaining to the following year, which I'll describe shortly, recognize the deep dedication of our great faculty and our excellent staff, who since the earliest days of the pandemic have kept our campuses safe, our students learning, our research productive, and our service strong. In terms of the 23 governor's allowance, let me take a step back and say, as you know, the USM, or as you may know, the USM operating budget includes revenues from three different sources in broad terms: the state appropriation, which is, I'll be talking about tuitions and fees, and then thirdly, federal grants, auxiliary services, and other revenues. So our total revenues provide for a budget this coming year of $6.2 billion. The governor's proposal totals $1.67 billion. And this is a combination of general fund, higher education investment fund, and special cigarette restitution funds. I mentioned the $1.67 billion, plus in a separate item, the governor is recommending an additional $198 million in support of a 3% COLA and a 2.5% merit that is included in the DVM personnel budget. So if all these budget actions are approved, and it's not over until it's over, I guess April 15th or whatever the end date is this year, but if all these budget items are approved, the USM will receive a net increase of $370 million or 24.8% over the FY22 appropriation. The governor's allowance includes additional increases of various items including $93.8 million as a reinstatement of full funding from the Board of Public Works base budget cut back in 2021. It includes $22.3 million as an increase for HBCU institutions resulting from the HB1 legal settlement. And one other thing I'll highlight among the many that I won't, $2.5 million in one-time funding for the Miller Center for Democracy and the Law, created in memory of our good friend and legendary former Senate President Mike Miller. So that's the governor's proposal. There's an assumption in the governor's operating budget proposal, which is that tuition increases are assumed to increase at 2% for resident undergraduate students and 5% for non-resident undergraduate students. That is an assumption. We have the ultimate say on that, and we'll vote on that sometime in the spring after we get feedback from our presidents. And as I mentioned, during the legislative session, adjustments may still be recommended to the governor's allowance in order to fund or to cut as we move forward. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's not over till it's over. The USM community will be working with the governor and the legislature to minimize any recommended reductions or reallocations. And as I mentioned, the final USM operating budget, including whatever comes out of the legislature finally, plus tuition, fees, grants, et cetera, will be submitted to the board for its consideration in April, May. So that's my report on the operating proposal by the governor. I will follow with the discussion of the capital, but are there any questions about this portion of it? Okay, so along with the operating budget, the governor also released his 2023 capital budget last month. And in your materials, there's a summary chart that shows the board's request to the state last June. And we kind of go through that in May of every year at our board meeting in our annual cycle. So we have our recommendation, and then the governor's recommended 5-year capital improvement program. And as you can see, the results appear to be quite favorable for the system and will help address a great number of critical needs beyond what we asked for. The governor's FY23 to 27, we look at these capital improvement programs in 5-year terms, includes a number of added project funds with no reductions or deferrals. This is really good news. And in this case, we are hopeful the General Assembly will also support the governor's plan. I know Senator Peters used to be the key person in the Senate reviewing the capital budgets. Now he's on our team, and hopefully we can all work together to support this. So the governor's CIP by the numbers, capital improvement plan CIP by the numbers. The 5-year total is $1.24 billion. This is a total increase when compared to our request of $217.7 million. It's incredible. Projects advanced by the governor include the College Park Interdisciplinary Engineering Building by 1 year. And I know something very near and dear to President Hrabowski, UMBC Sherman Hall renovation, which is advanced by 2 years. New projects added by the governor, not advanced, but added, include the UMB Social Work Replacement Building. It's a $122 million building. Coppins Residence Hall, Frostburg Facilities Renewal, and importantly, $65 million in pay-go funding for the USM Capital Facilities Renewal Program. And one other thing I'll mention is, we know there's hyperinflation in the construction world today. So we frequently have add-ons to our approved budgets. There were funds in the capital program to address that as well. So that's the news on the capital budget. Again, very, very positive information, and I hope we'll all continue to advocate for that. Any questions related to that? Yeah, let's give the governor a hand. Thank you. Questions? Oh, good. Okay, well, I'll move forward then to my final item, which is a discussion of the USM audited financial statements and USM financial planning. But before I address the financial statements, I'd like to follow up on what the Chancellor discussed and take a moment to share with you the news of yesterday's bond sale. As the Chancellor mentioned, the 3 major credit rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, affirmed the USM's existing ratings with a stable outlook, which in times like this is really a testament to the excellent financial management by the Chancellor, Vice Chancellor Herbst, and their entire team, and all of you throughout the system. Moody's has the system at AA1. S&P and Fitch both assigned the system a AA+ rating with a stable outlook. And these ratings are all just one notch below the AAA top rating. So on Thursday morning, we conducted our latest bond auction for USM. The system sold 102,895,000 of Series A tax-exempt bonds at a true interest cost of 2.36% and a premium of approximately $12.7 million. These funds derived from this sale will be used by the USM towards ongoing and future spending on approved capital projects. And secondly, as we always try to do, we also refinanced some higher cost bonds of approximately $24 million that were issued in 2012 at a true interest cost of 1.13% and a premium on top of that of over $2.4 million. This will result in a savings of more than $550,000 over the next 4 years, which in turn will lower the debt service payments for our institutions. So these are outstanding results. Again, thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Vice Chancellor, and thank you, Presidents, for all that you do to instill this confidence by our rating agencies. And of course, the political leaders also, and the political climate here also plays into that. So in terms of our financial statements, everyone in the Finance Committee got the financial statements. They are a book about an inch thick with everything consolidated, broken out, tremendous detail. Yeah, Vice Chancellor Herbst is holding hers up. Let me just bottom line this. This system received a clean opinion, an unmodified, basically the highest opinion in terms of financial competency from our auditors, which is Clifton Larson Allen LLP. We took our time at the committee and had a very thorough discussion about this. And of course, these statements are important to investors and the financial community as they go through it, but that clean opinion is really the first and most important thing in the report. Let's see, we did have a decline in unrestricted cash balances last year of $26 million. That is not usual for us in a typical year, but I'll say that in that year, we had, at the beginning of the year when COVID hit, we had conservatively budgeted for a $500 million reduction. So I think our financial stewardship was really top notch. And again, thank you to all of you. So I've talked enough. I'd like to turn it over to Vice Chancellor Herbst to walk us through some slides related to this. And again, Vice Chancellor, thank you for your leadership. That's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Regeneptment, and good morning, everyone. I want to emphasize, and I appreciate all the accolades for the system office team. We have just an outstanding kind of nationally best practice team. What they do only happens because of the financial stewardship and leadership at every university. We do a lot, and I will take all the credit that my team deserves, but it's on top of the day in and day out financial management and the financial discipline that our universities demonstrate. We were asked to share a couple of the slides from Finance Committee, just 3, I promise, as to what goes into managing these finances. What are our guardrails? What's our cycle? So the first chart talks about our annual fund balance goal as an important financial discipline tool. And there's a lot of mystery around the fund balance, I realize, ongoing, and we have to continue to do a great job educating people. But the annual fund balance goal is a recommendation we make to the Chancellor every year, who then makes a decision. And what it relates to is the amount of unrestricted spending that each university is planning to do in that next year. And we ask them to take 1% of that unrestricted spending and put it aside to the fund balance. And importantly, this expectation is institutionalized in the president's performance reviews. And why do we do that? There's a couple of reasons. And we've demonstrated one that we don't talk about a lot, but have demonstrated it over the last 2 years. It acts as a cushion against serious financial crises like the one brought on by the pandemic. And we're able to draw on that so that we don't have to damage our permanent infrastructure. And going into the pandemic, that was one of our mantras from the Regents, from the Chancellor, from the President. This is a terrible event. We didn't know how long it was going to last, but we knew it wasn't going to last forever. And at the end of it, we knew we had to have our universities still strong to continue to teach, research, and serve. So we used a bit of fund balance to get our way through, and we were able to do that because of the savings that each of the universities had over the many years. There's, of course, another reason for the fund balance. We have to demonstrate to the people who lend us money that we are able to cover our debt and cover our debt service payments. And so that's the annual fund balance. Another tool we use is the revenue bond authorizations that the board approves. So you all every year are asked to approve a level of bond authorizations that we're allowed to essentially issue bonds against. This is important because our own revenue bonds inform the capital budget, and particularly the part of the capital budget that we call the system funded part, i.e. the part we pay for. And that occurs each June. And then the total of cash funding available for capital projects or other needs that are outside of the fund balance goal. And these are the projects that typically fall below $5 million. And we have well understood ways to approve those between myself and the Chancellor. And of course, any project costs exceeding $5 million are presented to the board for approval. Can we go on to the next slide? This one folks thought was especially helpful. And in this, we attempted to capture the cycle of all things financial. And I'd like to direct your attention to where we start, which is enrollment projections. That's what we do. That's why we're here, is to educate students. And that is the fuel for everything else we do. So I won't go through each step, but you can see that everything we do financially is interrelated and one follows the other. We start with the enrollment projections, which, by the way, we're about to look at the annual enrollment projections from the universities in another couple of weeks. And that informs both the operating budget and the capital budget. We update what we understand to be enrollment, both in terms of students and the revenues that that represents in the fall as we get more accurate information. And of course, the audited financial statements are an annual way for the outside world to understand that they can trust the information we provide. That's really what audited financial statements are about, that you can trust the information. And then from there, and as you heard, we just completed this year's cycle on debt issuance with a very successful bond auction yesterday. Let's go on to the next one in the interest of time. And this is my last chart. So these are the guardrails, the financial planning metrics we use. So our team at the system tracks project approvals and monitors the status of spending throughout the year. So we're not just looking at once a year. And this was especially important during the pandemic. We actually increased the frequency with which we looked at what was happening financially since it was such a volatile situation. And we look at both cash as well as revenue bonded projects to ensure that the project approvals outstanding but not spent are taken into account. If you think about it, we ask the board to approve a bunch of projects, which with their approval, we're committing the funds, but we don't necessarily start spending those funds for perhaps a year or two. We have to keep track of all that. We have to maintain by board policy at least a 90% minimum ratio of reserves to debt to be in compliance. That means on an adjusted basis, we have to take into account all claims against the reserves and the requirements to issue additional debt. I will tell you that at the end of FY21, which is the last year we have audited financials for, the system's ratio of reserves to debt stood at about 136%, well above the 115% that had been planned for back when we were talking about this in the fall of 2020. And the reason for that is twofold. One, the generosity of the federal government in providing not one, not two, but 3 rounds of debt of relief during COVID. And we have to acknowledge that was a big part of our financial results. But I'd be remiss if I didn't again point out the magnificent management on a daily basis and the hard decisions that the presidents and their cabinets have had to make over the last 2 years to balance the need for short-term financial discipline with maintaining our ability to do what we do for a living over the long haul. And with that, I thank you, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Does anyone have questions for Ellen?
Congratulations to Ellen and her leadership.
You know, actually, we owe a debt of thanks to both Regeneptment and Vice Chancellor Herbst. Yeah. Regeneptment, since taking over the committee, has really demystified all of these reports, and he spends time in each committee meeting making sure everyone understands how the finances work. And I think that's been extremely useful to the committee members. And Vice Chancellor Hurt has just done an outstanding job of leading the whole financial organization. And when the regents have questions, she stood up work groups so that we can work on it together and move forward. And so thank you to both of them.
Thank you.
Now the Chancellor is going to introduce our strategic plan presentations. And welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Well, we have a treat for you in terms of what I think are some exciting strategic plans. Let me say just at the outset that, and we presaged this before, Chair Gooden and I need to leave at the most inopportune moment during this presentation, probably, Jennifer, because the legislature is calling. This is a scheduled hearing. And unfortunately, it falls during our Board of Regents meeting. So apologies in advance. Madam Chair, I have the privilege on behalf of President Pines, who could not be here with us in person today, although I do see him on the screen. If it's okay with you, Daryl, let me try out what I was going to say. Okay. So let me formally introduce to you the University of Maryland, College Park Senior Vice President and Provost, Jennifer King Rice. I think this is the first meeting, Jennifer, in which you're representing President Pines, who, as I said, couldn't be here in person today. Daryl appointed Provost Rice last August. She's no stranger to College Park, and I would say publicly she's no stranger to me, because I got to know her in her role as Dean of the College of Education as we together built up Empower. And she's a wonderful colleague. She's held positions of leadership at College Park for over 25 years. Most notably before this as Dean of the College of Education. And I need you to know that she has led a inclusive strategic planning process, both at the college level and then what you're going to hear about today. She has always put research infrastructure, instructional program improvements, and DEI forward in advancing the colleges and the university's great reputation. And I'm privileged to introduce you, and I know the chair and the regents are eager to hear your report.
Thank you so very much. Is this working? Yes. So I just want to reiterate that I am here on behalf of President Pines, who's joining us by Zoom. So Daryl, it's good to have you here as well. I want to just start by thanking President Gerald for hosting us today. It's wonderful to be here up in Baltimore. And also Chair Gooden and of course, Chancellor Perman and all of the regents for just giving us a few minutes to share our exciting new strategic plan that we launched just Wednesday at our University Senate meeting, but also in conjunction with our Board of Trustees meeting and this Board of Regents meeting. We thought that would be a good way to launch our plan. You know, I have to just start by saying our plan reflects many of the compelling points that Dr. Frazier made this morning. So it was so wonderful to hear her presentation because we're really emphasizing some of the calls that she gave to this group: impact and meaningful public engagement, how our work as in higher education really matters, not just in our scholarly communities and not just with our students, but in the world around us and in our communities. These ideas are absolutely central to the strategic plan that I'm going to describe today, Fearlessly Forward, in pursuit of excellence and impact for the public good. And I have to say, you know, it's been heartening to hear all of the good news this morning, all of the announcements, the wonderful things to celebrate. We have so much to look forward to, and I think our strategic plan has very much brought that to the fore for our own community in College Park. So our planning started late spring, just as I was starting to step into this role with these words from President Pines. And I don't know who's controlling slides, but we can, great. Thank you very much. So there are a few words that I want to just pull out from this quote. And really it's about reinventing and re-envisioning our campus and our community as a modern flagship research university. And the last phrase may be the most important, for the common good. We're really about our impact on the public good in this strategic plan. Over the past 6 months, we have engaged our community very broadly in an inclusive process that has involved the collection and analysis of qualitative and quantitative data, many voices, over 500 people provided direct input, ideas, and feedback through our planning committees that included faculty, staff, students, administrators, as well as community leaders who played an important role in this. We also had something we called our Catalyst Committee that really pushed our planning committees to think big, to come up with bold ideas, different new ideas to push us forward. And we met with stakeholders in our community using interviews and focus groups, questions of the week that we put out. So we were really about hearing all of the voices and integrating those voices into our plan. We've presented this plan and gotten feedback through a number of open forums that really brought our number of voices beyond 1,000. So lots of different voices. I do have to give a shout out to Dr. O'Meara. I know she's already been introduced, but she was extremely important in terms of the assistance that she helped provide this process as well when she was with us before she went over to Towson. But in every one of these forums, we really engaged participants and solicited feedback. So this truly was an inclusive and collaborative process from beginning to end. The next slide lays out some of the guiding principles that shape our plan. And we can just scroll right through these. I'm not going to take time to define them, though they are well defined in our plan. But these aren't just words or phrases. These are the principles that we've agreed to share that shape and guide how we are going to implement this plan. They're woven throughout the fabric of our plan from top to bottom. So they're not standalone pillars. They're pervasive throughout the plan. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So let me just say our vision. We see our vision as ambitious and fearless, and I'm just going to take a minute to highlight what this says. We look to improve the lives of every person on earth. We're going to reimagine teaching and learning, accelerate solutions to the grand challenges of our time through our research and discovery, and forge a diverse and inclusive community where our differences are celebrated and equity is relentlessly pursued. Together, we will dedicate ourselves to advancing the public good because our individual well-being is enduringly bound to our collective well-being. And as a public research university, we have an opportunity and an obligation to advance the collective well-being. So our plan is structured around four, what we call strategic commitments or 4 pillars. And I just want to highlight what's in those for you so you have a flavor of where we're going. So this schematic identifies the 4 pillars. We reimagine learning. We take on humanity's grand challenges. We invest in people and communities, and we partner to advance the public good. And together, those 4 pillars are moving us fearlessly forward. So our first pillar, our first strategic commitment, if you will, is we reimagine learning and teaching as inclusive, experiential, publicly engaged, creative, integrative, holistic, and empowering. Under this pillar, we have 3 goals. And I just want to highlight some of the features of those goals. There are also objectives and tracking systems and a lot of meat behind this, but just to give you a broad sense of what we're doing here, we're focusing on developing innovative and inclusive approaches for teaching and learning. We're going to focus on high impact experiential learning that really draws on problem-based learning and internships, community engagement. And we're looking to create opportunities for multidisciplinary collaboration, working across boundaries. So our hope is to prepare the next generation of leaders and scientists, poets and authors, change agents and global citizens through really meaningful educational opportunities. Our second pillar is taking on humanity's grand challenges. Our education, scholarship, and service are designed to accelerate solutions to humanity's grand challenges within our communities and around the globe. Under this pillar, we're going to build multidisciplinary and engaged research and curricular innovations. And multidisciplinary is critical to this plan, breaking down barriers, because grand challenges are grand because they're multidisciplinary. They're hard, and we need to work across disciplines and boundaries to solve them. Building again on Dr. Fraser's presentation and a comment made by President Hrabowski, we really need to leverage our location. We are uniquely positioned near the state and nation's capitals to really advance evidence-based policy to address these grand challenges. And we need to amplify our impactful research and scholarship and creative activities and teaching. We need to amplify that through strategic communications and visibility and translation. We have a responsibility to bring our findings to the community to really make a difference, to make it impactful. Our next pillar is investing in people and communities. We invest in people, their well-being and advancement, and the conditions that support their ability to fully participate in and thrive in our community, state, and world. You know, on the one hand, we are in the business of human capital, of educating that next generation of global citizens. But we also recognize that our greatest asset in doing that are our people. So we need to invest in our faculty and staff, the people within our community, in many ways. And so we've laid those out in our strategic plan as well. We want to lead the nation in living a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion in all that we do. We want to become a connected, coordinated, and effective community of care that supports success as well as well-being of our community. And we're going to align our evaluations and rewards and incentives with our goals and values. Again, this is something Dr. Fraser mentioned and that we're taking very seriously with some of our first initiatives. We're looking at our promotion and tenure standards, for instance, to be sure that the things that we measure and track are the things that we value. Issues like collaboration and diversity, equity, and inclusion and real world impact need to be in our evaluation structures if we expect to see them in our behaviors. And so that's one place that we're starting. And finally, we partner to advance the common good. We recognize that our future is tied to and interconnected with our partners. And we're going to build bridges that allow our research to have an impact locally and globally, our education to prepare students for civic engagement and work, and our service to create solutions for a more equitable, sustainable, and resilient world. So we're looking to expand our impact through strategic research partnerships and to catalyze innovation and entrepreneurship, both locally in our Discovery District and the Prince George's County area, but also across the state and beyond. And we're looking to be good neighbors to enhance the economy and educational outcomes, social justice, quality of life, and civic engagement of our neighbors and neighborhoods through relation building and ongoing commitment to partnerships. So when we take all of these pillars together, we will be moving fearlessly forward into the next chapter of the University of Maryland at College Park. I want to say just a couple of comments on how we're going to implement this plan, and then connect it to some of the work that's been happening with the USM plan as well. So we see this plan as you can go on to the last slide, as a living document. As we implement this plan over the next decade, we're going to continually engage our community, assess our progress, and set priorities in real time so that this plan can evolve and grow with us. We don't want to set everything out over the next 10 years because we know that the world changes around us. And it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen. The pandemic is a perfect example of that. So this plan is designed to live and breathe and grow with us. We have structures in place, implementation committees around each of our pillars, and we're off and running with many of our initiatives. And you know, as we've gone through this planning process, we've paid careful attention to the USM planning process as well. And there are a number of points of alignment that I just want to conclude with that I think are very synergistic and are going to help our success as well as the success of the system. So access, equity, and inclusion are featured in both of these plans. Academic success, excellence, and achievement. Research and innovation, which is very much at the core of our mission, alongside innovative teaching. Community impact and partnerships, taking advantage of our location and our public nature and land grant identity. Investing in people, in the people that we're growing as students, but also in our own people who work within our institutions. alumni engagement, and workforce development. So we share many goals and principles, and we think that will be the key to our success, as well as the key to the system's success. So happy to be part of it, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Provost Rice. Are there any questions? Regent Merrick.
If you were to compare this strategic plan with whatever your previous iteration was, I don't know if that's 5 or 10 years ago, what are the big differences? Like, what is this committing you to do that you weren't in the past?
Yeah, so the prior strategic plan had 2 iterations. There was a more recent update. So there was a plan in place and then a recent update. You know, that plan, there were many similar features. I mean, some of the same values carry through DEI, but I think the biggest difference in this plan is that it's more flexible and will grow with us, but it also really focuses heavily on the nexus between our institution and what happens internally within our institution and the community and the world around us, and how we can be having an impact on that world in really meaningful and direct ways. And I would say that's the biggest difference. That's foreground in our strategic plan. That was, I would say, background in the other plan. So it wasn't that it was ignored, but that's really at the front of where we're heading now. And I think that the prior strategic plan, we made a lot of progress on it. I think it really positions us to take this new outward-looking approach around the public good.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Regent Wood.
Thank you. The way the University of Maryland is growing and the way it's expanding and the way the mission, the strategic plan shows growth. This is a specific question, and it may not be appropriate to ask you that right now, but is there any land left around the campus for what we could envision to be 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 more years of expansion?
Yeah, so we're focusing heavily on our Discovery District and building, using that space to build partnerships that I think have grown very dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. So when we think about expansion, there's our own campus proper, but there's also the ecosystem that surrounds our campus. And that's really what we've been focusing on. So, I don't want to go into any details around that, but I think that's really our eye is trained on that Discovery District right now in terms of where we can expand our own footprint, but also where we can expand our partnerships.
Thank you. Any other questions out there in cyberspace? Nope. Well, thank you, Provost Rice, for that great presentation. We look forward to seeing you again. We're going to move from College Park to Shady Grove.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Got Ann Kadamian. Did I butcher that?
You got it.
Thank you. She's the executive director of universities at Shady Grove, in case you were wondering, and she's going to talk about their strategic plan update.
Thank you so much.
Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Gerald, for hosting us here today. And I want to give a special thanks to Chancellor Perman and to Chair Gooden for the support they've given us through this whole process. I also want to recognize Regent Leggett, who served as a co-chair of USG strategic planning process and has been a tremendous inspiration and source of support through this whole effort as well. So thank you all. A 10-year vision. I also want to say to Provost Rice and to President Pines, congratulations. It's a beautiful plan. It's very inspiring, and we look forward to working with you, seeing how we can help amplify as well. So, and also amplify the University System of Maryland plan as well. A 10-year vision, USG 2.0. When we began this process, we set out 3 goals. We had a wonderful coach and supporter through this process, Paula Weiderlight, a local consultant. And she said, you should have 3 goals in this process. One is you should engage broadly and widely. And we have done that. This process has been extremely inclusive. We have, Shady Grove is a very layered, complex place with many partners. And so it was a broad, inclusive process through work groups and workshops and whiteboard sessions and open forums and strategic planning committee meetings and on and on and on. So I feel very good about the inclusivity, the engagement of our process. The second goal is you should have a shared vision at the end of it. This has been our goal, is to have a vision for the next 10 years. And as Provost Rice said, we don't have all of the details pinned down for how we'll get there over the next 10 years because we see it as a living plan that we will continue to work with all of our partners in developing as we go forward. And finally, a third component of this is you have to have accountability. You have to have a way to hold yourself accountable for moving forward on that vision. And we're going to be working very hard on our dashboards and on the ways that we go about doing this in a very inclusive kind of way. All right, next slide, please. So why a need for USG 2.0? Next slide, please. As we all know, the economy and the higher education landscape is changing rapidly. More and more careers require a 4-year degree. In fact, in Montgomery County, estimates are that over the next several years, 75% of the new jobs will require a 4-year degree. Yet currently, we're all challenged by the enrollments in higher education in meeting that demand that is there. The post-COVID economy, tectonic shifts in our economy in terms of industries rising, industries declining, industries changing, and how we meet those workforce needs. And there's a strong need for data to drive future success in how we address the challenge of enrollments and how we address the challenge of four-year degree requirements and do it in a way that meets the needs of our transforming economy as well. Next slide, please. At USG, we are going to build on what we know well, what we do well. And that is, first of all, being a champion for non-traditional students. Now, 74% of all students across the nation are considered non-traditional, meaning students coming from diverse communities, students first in their family to attend college, students who have families, students who work while they're going to school, students who are trying to finance their own education. These are the students we serve almost 100% at Shady Grove. In partnership with all of you. And we're going to continue to focus on the needs of what we call the future student, the student of the future. We also are going to build on being a unique asset to the University System of Maryland and our partners. We want to work closely with everybody in trying to amplify the goals of the system, the goals of our partners, and what we can do uniquely in Montgomery County, Maryland to serve non-traditional students. Next slide, please. And we're going to continue to deepen our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We serve many first-generation college students and first-generation Americans. We provide access to high-quality degree and certificate programs at Shady Grove in Montgomery County. And we're going to continue to center our efforts around an equity promise. Next slide, please. So there will be 4 new strategic imperatives of USG. Next slide. First of all, we're calling this the promise, right? Traditionally, we've been driven by enrollments and degree completion at Shady Grove. This is appropriately the role of our partners as well. We want to add value to our partners and to the system and to our students and think about where can we add value? Where will we be that next addition of energy, if you will, for our students? Under USG 2.0, we will hold ourselves accountable for working towards students securing meaningful employment and career opportunities upon completion of their studies. This means focusing on internships and experiential learning. This means focusing on mentoring. This means focusing deeply on our industry and employee partnerships to really build that infrastructure so that students coming out of the programs at Shady Grove can look forward to meaningful employment in the area where they are graduating. Next slide, please. A second change from USG today to USG of the future. We've typically worked with our university partners to develop degree programs. We want to change that. We want to start focusing on pathways to careers and working with our partners to fill those pathways in ways that lead to meaningful careers. So expanding our focus from degrees to thinking holistically across the pathway with all of our partners. Next slide, please. Traditionally, we've provided traditional student services at Shady Grove. Going forward, we're going to be focusing on career readiness for our students. So our student services are going to be focused through a career-ready lens around leadership, around teamwork, around wellness, around career readiness altogether. Next slide, please. And finally, fiscal sustainability. Our current fiscal model has been built around hosting our degree programs, and it encourages something of a real estate mindset at Shady Grove, of coming and delivering from the home campuses programs at Shady Grove. That model also does not grow with us. So we are going to be working to build a model that supports growth, that really supports innovation and collaboration in our space, and focuses on return of investment for students and for other stakeholders. Next slide, please. We've used the concepts put forth by Jim Collins, who is a management consultant, in order to drive our strategic planning process. Two of the concepts stand out for us. One is the hedgehog. I won't go into why it's called the hedgehog, but it's an interesting story. The hedgehog is a combination of what USG could be best at, what is our passion, and what is our economic engine. And the intersection of those drives our hedgehog vision. And our vision, as we've described it now, is inspiring and leading educational transformation to serve all learners and to support a thriving, equitable economy. This will be what drives us going forward. Next slide, please. The second concept from Jim Collins is the flywheel. The hedgehog is at the center, but the flywheel concept is, just as in mechanical engineering, it's part of an engine. A flywheel is an entity that requires, it's hard to get going at first. It's a lot of pressure. It's hard to get that wheel around the first time. But as you go more and more around the wheel, it gets easier and easier to turn until there's a momentum there. And Collins will say it takes companies and organizations from good to great when you get that flywheel right. We want to get that flywheel right at Shady Grove. And we want to produce that kind of inevitability of success, of career-ready success for our students. And the flywheel takes you through getting our own house in order, really building the capacity at Shady Grove, starting to build pathways with our partners, building up our capacity to measure and assess the success of students in pathways and to plan for pathways, taking that insight and driving towards innovation in how we plan together, how we plan for pathways, producing students who are career ready to hit the ground running, who get great jobs across the region, which builds community wealth, which builds USG's reputation, which allows us to continue to do what we do. Next slide, please. Throughout this process, we came to these strategic imperatives that I highlighted. We've identified goals that are across the flywheel. And with our work groups, we put together 9 different work groups consisting of about 15 to 20 members, highly representative across all of our partners and all of our collaborators across the county and the state. And they identify directional shifts. Those directional shifts are going to be where we focus our attention as we start to pilot and drive implementation. Next slide, please. Our values and our commitments. We believe strongly at Shady Grove that our culture is a reflection of our values and commitments. And not just what we say, but what we do and how we live our future. And these commitments represent, after 10 months of work, these commitments stand out as what, in some cases, we do and we practice, and in some cases, what we need to aspire to in order to really shift the culture at Shady Grove, to be able to drive that flywheel, to be able to drive our vision. And so delivering an exceptional educational experience, being a champion of equity, practicing empathy, dreaming together and reimagining what we know, always ready to learn, collaborating to reach new heights. We don't do anything individually at Shady Grove. It is all a massive partnership every single day. Deploy evidence for our decisions and all we do. Act with ownership. Everybody owns student success for all the students coming out of all of our programs at Shady Grove. Practice sustainability in our fiscal management, our facilities management, and our environmental footprint. And finally, just jump. While we will and always will be stewards of our resources, there are times when you must take action to learn, and there are times when you must experiment to learn. And so we are committed to taking action as part of our learning process. Next slide, please. So activating USG 2.0, years 1 and 2. We're going to focus initially on building the capacity of USG. We have a number of areas we need to build up around data, around some of our pathway skills. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion space needs work and strengthening as well. So we're going to be focusing on building the capacity of USG. We're also going to be communicating the mission, not only what the vision is, but also setting our goals, our more narrow and specific goals, establishing our dashboard as well, and communicating that. we're going to be shifting our focus. And so we're going to be using a series of task forces and action teams in order to start shifting from the way we do work today at Shady Grove to the way we plan to do the work going forward. And also letting that be an innovation factory for us as well as we use the task forces and the action teams. We're going to be creating these pathways, hopefully across Montgomery County with our partners in the key areas where there's high demand and real need. And we're going to be continuously reviewing and recalibrating what we do in order to improve our service to all of the students from all of our partner universities. Next slide, please. 9 universities, 1 campus. I like to add, and great results as well. This represents our wonderful partners who are at the universities at Shady Grove, and we'd love to grow to all 12 partners as well at the universities at Shady Grove. Thank you so much to all of our partners. Next slide, please. And thank you all for your time. I hope that was informative. I hope you have a sense of where we're going, our future direction. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you, your support. This is going to take a lot of work to make these shifts at Shady Grove, relationships, resources, tremendous effort, but we are excited about it and ready to go. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Hedgehogs and flywheels. Yes, we can't do strategic planning without metaphors, but nevertheless, are there any questions after that presentation? Senator? Regent Peters.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. We also talked about elephants today. We talked about tigers,
yeah, we did.
Hedgehogs, and a pig's heart. So I think we covered everything. Who would you say is your biggest competitor? Is it the community college? I mean, if students are going to decide to go to your university or somewhere else, what students, what do they decide?
Thank you so much for that question. First of all, I want to say the community colleges are our deep and close partners. All the students coming to Shady Grove come in as transfer students from the community colleges. So they are our deep, this doesn't work without our close partnership with the community colleges. But our students at Shady Grove, they are typically very close to home. They are working, they have families. So if not for Shady Grove, oftentimes they would not have the opportunity to get their 4-year degree. So I don't see us in competition with anybody in the immediate region. I see us as providing an extra service, an extra opportunity for students who might not otherwise be able to go to a 4-year university. There are certainly other universities around the region who might provide similar kinds of services and things, but within the university system of Maryland, it's a very close partnership.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions?
I have a comment.
Regent Wood.
I'd just like to make one observation. I can remember when I went to the very first graduation ceremony at USG, and I think there were 7 graduates. And what a difference looking at that compared to today. USG is an incredible success story. I can remember when Britt Kerwin was championing the idea and when the grounds that the USG is on now was a cornfield owned by the Kozelski family. And the negotiations were made. There was a lot of questions about how is this going to turn out? What's this going to be like? Is this really going to be a success? And I don't think there's anybody that knows anything about Shady Grove that has anything to say except it's a wildly successful concept. It's done beautiful things, and I'm so glad it's in Montgomery County.
And I think we can grow even more. We have over 13,000 graduates over the last 20 years from Shady Grove. Yeah. We currently serve 3,600 students. I think we should be serving 7,500 to 10,000. So wow. We need to grow.
Wow. Unbelievable.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've concluded our agenda for our open meeting. And so now I get to read this tome here. The Open Meetings Act permits public bodies to close their meetings to the public in circumstances outlined in Section 3-305 of the Act and to carry out administrative functions exempted by Section 3-103 of the Act. The Board of Regents will now vote to reconvene in a closed session. The agenda for the public meeting today includes a written statement with a citation of the legal authority and the reasons for closing the meeting and a listing of the topics to be discussed. The statement has been provided to the Regents and it is posted on the USM's website. Chair will entertain a motion to close the meeting. Second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? We're closed and I'm reliably informed that we're taking our midday break and we will